Welcome back. Let's continue this.
Fanfiction, unleash your imagination. And it's how AFO canonically got fought. Chapter 29, Friends and News. Welcome, Izuku greeted with a simple smile, hesitant to show any more excitement while welcoming a new guest at his house. Kirishima barely met his eyes, spending most of his time looking past Izuku at the large house behind him. "Hey Midoriya," Kirishima responded. "Wow, you got a cool place here. I'm starting to suspect Ida was serious with the house comment yesterday. So, this is where you train?" "Partially," Izuku said. "Some things have needed more space, but this should do at least for the morning. I hope you've recovered from yesterday." "Yeah, I'm okay. The biggest problem was convincing my parents." "I know how that feels," Hitachi said as he stretched a few meters away, wearing his UA gym uniform already. "At least they know Izuku and Tinya." "Well, I'm here now," Kirishima said. "Thank you for having me. I know you like to keep this stuff kinda private." "You should not worry about that," Tinya said from next to Hitachi. Izuku might be a bit wary of trusting people due to some earlier experiences, but having more decent people around is good for him. He has smiled a lot more since Hitachi came along. "Don't underplay yourself," Hitachi commented. "Guys, can we get started?" Izuku sidetracked them. "Why?" Hitachi asked. "Are you in a hurry to try out your new unbreakable punching bag?" "Oh, you got one too," Kirishima said. "What model do you use?" "I haven't managed to find one that doesn't break." "He's talking about you," Izuku said. "Oh, well, just be careful." "I don't want to break anyone else's hand." "I appreciate the concern," Izuku said, "but don't even think of going easy on our training." Translation: he wants more of a challenge than we can give, Hitachi added. He wasn't exactly wrong. Even Tinya with his size and speed couldn't push him like he was used to with the Nomus, except in long-distance dashes when there was plenty of space. Izuku wasn't going to say that to their faces though. "Well, I'd love to see what you got," Kirishima said with a wide smile. "I haven't really had good training partners except for some private lessons and training with Mina more recently. Maybe you should just stop talking and see who wins." "I'm up for it," Kirishima said. "Just don't cut off my limbs." "Hey," Izuku said and smirked, "Toshi and Tinya still have all of theirs." "Izuku is joking already," Hitachi said. "Kirishima is doing better than I thought." "Hitachi," Tinya said, sounding disappointed, but the hand he rubbed his forehead with only partially hid his smile. Izuku moved to an open area of grass. Kirishima followed and they faced each other. Tinya and Hitachi got up to watch from the side. Izuku glanced at them without turning his head from Kirishima. "Don't even think about using him as an excuse to take it easy." Hitachi let out an exaggerated sigh and they moved to the other side of the yard to spar. "Ready?" Izuku asked Kirishima. "Yes," the redhead responded with a smile and hardened his body. He had barely blinked when Izuku was already on him with a punch straight to the face. Pain radiated from Izuku's hand as his entire arm shook from and felt a little numb from the impact. There might have been some fractures considering the pain and how it went away. Izuku had gotten really good at recognizing broken bones based on the pain. He hopped back to avoid a counterattack, but none came. Kirishima just tilted his head without any sign of even the slightest pain, looking at Izuku with concern in his eyes. "Are you okay?" I tried to warn Y-. "I'm okay," Izuku responded, shaking his now fine hand. "Had to try. Seems I can't do much damage without using the dragon blade. I wonder how much heat you can take." Kirishima questioned, holding his hands in front of himself. "I know you took one of Bakugo's explosions to the face, even if it would have been one of the smaller ones. I think you'll survive training." You think? Welcome to the boot camp Midoriya, Hitachi called from the other side of the yard, only for Tenya to take advantage of his distraction to pin him to the ground. Focus Toshi, Izuku said with a smiling before turning back towards Kirishima. Let's continue. Kirishima smiled and hardened again. This time he went for the offensive with a barrage of punches. His rocky appearance gave the impression of someone strong and slow, but his attacks were anything but slow. Izuku dodged the first attack easily, much to Kirishima's surprise, but as the punches kept coming Izuku started struggling as he tried to find any weaknesses he could exploit without slicing Kirishima in two like the UA robots. He didn't even know which was harder, the robot's armor or Kirishima's hardening. He'd have to come up with some kind of test for that. One punch grazed Izuku's arm as he was a little too slow with a dodge and a sharp edge tore straight through his sleeve, cutting all the way to his skin. Kirishima tensed and pulled his arm back almost faster than he had punched with it. Sorry, are you okay? Izuku turned his arm and looked down at the cut without saying a word. His lips slowly bent into a smirk. Kirishima stared at him and gulped audibly. In a swift motion Izuku swept Kirishima's feet out from under him. With surprising agility Kirishima avoided falling down and instead backflipped back onto his feet. As he did so, his shirt rose up enough to show that to achieve such a move had forced him to undo some of his hardening. The soles of Kirishima's shoes were barely back on the grass as Izuku charged and delivered a powerful punch straight to his stomach. He couldn't exactly describe what he hit as soft, but at least this time the hit hurt Kirishima more than himself. Unfortunately it wasn't enough to bring the redhead down, and by the follow-up punch he had hardened again. Izuku hopped back, massaging his hand but with a smile on his face. I'd say you are tougher than you look, but in this case the look is pretty accurate. Thanks. I really thought you got me for a moment. Every quirk has limitations, Izuku responded. I just stumbled into one of yours. It might not slow you down as much as one would expect, but you aren't as flexible while using it, or you could say you are more agile than you usually show. Yeah, I guess you could say so. I do my stretches but they are more difficult with my quirk. It can be pretty useful in a fight, but it is pretty simple and straightforward. It's amazing, Izuku almost shouted and started talking faster than he intended. You just need to find different ways of using it, or even just improve to use it better. Like if you could switch faster between hardened and unhardened, I wouldn't have gotten that hit in. Izuku already had a notebook open, and he was taking notes on this new discovery while muttering to himself. Where did you get that? It's better not to worry about that, Hitachi said, joining the duo while taking a sip of water. There are some questions that aren't meant to be answered. Tenya sighed next to Hitachi. He had a holster made that keeps a notebook against his back like the equipment belt in his hero costume, except this one is hidden under his shirt. Don't tell him that, Hitachi elbowed Tenya's side. It's just a regular notebook, Izuku said without slowing down with his note-taking. The other one is still hidden. Other? Kirishima asked. He has a whole separate notebook for us and our training, Tenya explained. Shouldn't you be training? Izuku asked as he closed the notebook. Okay, let's get back to work. I still have a rock to crack. Hitachi and Tenya barely had time to get out of the way before Izuku and Kirishima were at it again. It was much the same as before. Izuku's punches did nothing and avoiding Kirishima's got gradually harder, until Izuku caught one of his extended arms and threw Kirishima over his shoulder on the ground. He was on top of the redhead in an instant but couldn't do any more damage than before. He tried to just grab and restrain his opponent, but Kirishima smirked and pushed back, his hardened arm stronger than humanly possible without a strength quirk. Izuku tried to back off, but Kirishima had a hold of his wrists. Got you. You think so? Izuku responded and activated the dragon blade on both his arms, slowly starting with low heat. Smoke began rising from under Kirishima's hands. He was still stubbornly holding onto Izuku, but as Izuku upped the temperature, Kirishima's expression tensed. Finally, he let go with a small hiss. Izuku was on his feet 2 meters away before that was over. You are pretty good, and really tough with your quirk. I really can't seem to beat it with quirkless combat. He crouched again in a battle-ready stance, but this time with his blades lit and formed into shields on both arms. Heh, things are getting interesting then, Kirishima, back on his feet, responded and charged. Izuku again evaded the first few attacks, but then he blocked one with his flaming shields. Kirishima yanked his arm back before the heat had any chance of burning through his hardening, but the impact had already happened. Izuku got pushed back. His whole body shook while his arms felt numb. Well, at least you really aren't holding back for training. How should I put this? Kirishima scratched his head. Izuku raised his eyebrows. You are holding back. Well, yes. Don't take it the wrong way, Kirishima said quickly. You don't have any durability quirks. If I didn't hold back, a direct hit could kill you, or break bones at least. Izuku looked at Kirishima for a moment and then quickly walked past him, grabbing his arm with one hand, a notebook already on the other. He dragged Kirishima across the front yard to a large boulder poking out of the ground. Izuku pointed at it. Punch that, as hard as you can. Are you sure? I don't want to mess up your yard. Just do it. My notes aren't going to be any good if I can't estimate your real strength with your quirk. Okay, if you insist. You should stay back. Kirishima pulled one hardened arm back and then in wide swing threw a single massive punch. When his fist hit the surface of the boulder, the impact appeared almost like an explosion as the shattering of the stone on the surface launched small shrapnel and left behind a crater around Kirishima's arm. His fist sunk even deeper, and the boulder cracked in two well beyond it. Izuku whistled, impressed, as he rarely was, while internally struggling to squash the urge to take Kirishima's quirk. Forget what I said before. My bones are glad you held back. I could say the same. I like my arms where they are. Izuku rubbed his chin, quiet for a moment, and smirked. This isn't really developing our skills. Want to try a no quirks round? You shouldn't rely on yours stopping every attack. Bring it on. To be fair to Kirishima, even without his quirk he gave a surprising amount of challenge to Izuku. Over multiple rounds of sparring, unable to take hits like before but also not restricted by his quirk, his style changed to a more mobile and agile one, making him harder to hit. It didn't save him from multiple meetings with the grass though. His quirk might have been hard to crack, but in quirkless combat Izuku was still ahead. They kept going round after round until both were laying on the ground full of bruises and breathing hard, wide smiles on both of their faces. Hitachi came to stand next to Izuku and looked down toward him for a moment. Then he glanced at Kirishima and turned to face nearby Tinya. Seems we chose the right one. I believe so, Tinya responded. I just wish one of them at least had the common sense to stop before going too far. So. Hitachi started, lunch. Yes please, Izuku said, not getting up. We'll get things ready, Hitachi said and turned to leave. As soon as he started walking, Izuku noticed a slight limp in his step. Izuku pushed himself up to a half-laying position supported by his arms. Is your leg okay? Good enough, Hitachi stopped to respond. Unlike you two, Tinya has some restraint. I think my back is still sensitive from yesterday despite recovery girl's treatment. Started acting out while we trained. I'll go see her again on Monday. Don't wait for that if it gets any worse. I got good doctors and quirk healers on speed dial. I know, Hitachi said as he kept walking, I've met them all already. I'd ask why, Kirishima started, but after the last couple of hours I think I understand. Midoriya doesn't mess around with training. If we hadn't taken our training seriously some or all of us, would have died yesterday, Izuku said. I don't want anyone here getting hurt, but I'd rather send you to a doctor than a morgue. I guess that makes sense. Being a hero can be dangerous. Depends on if you are worth the title. If you want to call yourself a hero, you need to be willing to get hurt or killed so others don't. Some heroes only fight when they are confident of victory and can claim glory with minimal risk. You really think so? I know it. I've suffered for it. Suffered, how? Izuku almost responded but choked up. Without another word he got up and went after Hitachi. That topic is something he won't easily talk about, Tinya told Kirishima quietly behind Izuku. Please don't try to ask about it. He will likely open up about some things if he ever feels he can trust you unconditionally, but not before. Just remember that if it ever happens, that will be the day he will need your support the most. Izuku looked back over his shoulder. Tinya, Izuku said louder than needed, making his larger friend flinch. Are you two coming? Of course. When they got inside, Hitachi was already bringing the chicken salad to the table. They couldn't eat anything too heavy before the afternoon training, so protein shakes would keep them going until the evening. They had just finished with lunch when the doorbell rang. Izuku of course tensed right away. The only people who had any business to visit, and enter through the door, were already there. I assume you aren't expecting anyone, Tinya said. No. Izuku got up from where he had been sitting and headed to the door. The trio of his guests followed but stayed further back, just curious. Even as Izuku reached to open the door, his other hand was tense and ready to ignite the dragon blade. He came closer to do so than he should have as he saw the familiar man with a long jacket. Detective. He paused just in time to look like he didn't have everything of the man memorized, while also grasping at the calm mind. Tsukachi, I thought you were supposed to interview us next week. Yes, about the USJ incident. However, something else has come up. May I come in? Izuku stayed quiet for a few seconds, wondering if he had any valid excuse to not allow the man inside. Besides being on the other side, he didn't exactly have a reason to hate the man like with all might. Yes, of course. He stepped out of the way to let the man in. It didn't take long for the perceptive detective to notice the others. I see you have company. I apologize if I interrupted anything. Don't worry about it, Izuku said as he followed the man inside. We were just having a lunch break from training. So, what made you come here? Right. What was your last contact with Katsuki Bakugo? And there went any positivity Izuku's quests had managed to cultivate over the morning. His expression fell into an empty stare. On Tuesday, when leaving school, as he and his mother finally realized his actions were going to have actual consequences. And you haven't heard of him since? Thankfully not. Why are you suddenly asking about the walking bomb threat? Midoriya, he has gone missing. No one has seen him since yesterday evening. His mother is afraid of what might have happened. Izuku looked at the man for several seconds, then the floor, and eventually his friends. I doubt anything has happened to him. Most of the time he is the most dangerous person present. If he has gone missing, that means he never accepted his own responsibility for what is happening. In the best case he is just trying to escape, but knowing him, he will blame others and might seek revenge. Considering his earlier crimes, I hope you treat this as chasing an escaped suspect, not a missing person. I am aware of your plans to pursue charges, but until evidence is presented to the police, we are approaching this as a teenager gone missing. If you know anything that might help, any place he might have gone to. No, Izuku said and turned away from the man. For most of my life I've tried to avoid him and have been very successful at that for the past year. So no, I don't know where he likes to hide out. Izuku paused. You should keep an eye on Hitashi's and Tinya's houses. If Bakugo decides he wants revenge, he'll come after me. Then we should stake out this house, Tsukachi said. No need to. It has more security than you think, and if Bakugo comes here, Izuku faced Tsukachi again with a cold stare. I can. I have to face him myself. The real problem is that he might try to get to me through them. Izuku nodded towards Tinya and Hitachi. He's already threatened them for no other reason than being my friends, and because he hates Toshi's quirk almost as much as my own. If that is really a possibility, I can request some monitoring, but that would include all of you, and there is a limit on what I can do on your word alone. Do you have any evidence of the threat? That specific threat, no. Bakugo destroyed all of the cameras before making it, but I can relay you the material about his tendency for violence we are preparing to use in court. Actually, never mind. I'll get some security myself. The detective looked at Izuku for a few seconds and then put his hand on Izuku's shoulder, probably thinking Izuku didn't realize his finger was discreetly touching skin on the side of his neck. Izuku held onto the calm mind he had already been using and let the quirk slowly take over more. If you are really that worried, I should talk with your parents. Are they home? At least he didn't realize, Izuku knew the man had investigated him. That meant Izuku was another step ahead. No. My father works abroad. Probably just went to sleep. My mother is dead. The calm mind barely kept Izuku's voice steady. I live alone, when I don't have friends over. I'm sorry. I don't need your sorry. Just find the walking bomb factory before something explodes. Izuku slapped Tsukachi's hand away from his shoulder, hoping he had managed to hide his lies. We will do our best. If you remember or hear anything about him, please contact me, and please relay my number to your father, Tsukachi said, offering a business card. Izuku snatched it from his hand without any customary politeness and without touching the man's fingers. Do you need anything else? We need to get back to training, now even more than before. No, not on this matter. We will keep looking for Bakugo and look into the possibility he might pose a threat. You know the charges I'm pressing include attempted murder? Izuku asked. Tsukachi rubbed his forehead. I'm aware. I will be in contact as needed, and please ask your father to contact me. Izuku gave barely a noticeable nod and escorted the man out. He drew a deep breath as soon as the door clicked closed. Are you okay? Hitachi asked. Izuku hadn't even noticed him approaching, and there was another danger of calm mind. Izuku looked down, hiding his expression. I know how you feel about all this, Tinya said, but you should remember he is a police officer when talking with him. We have bigger things to worry about than my politeness, Izuku said, looking at Tinya. How's the security at your house? You don't need to worry about me. My family recognizes that being heroes makes us targets. How about? Izuku turned to look at Hitachi. I have a lock on my door. Izuku looked at him for a few seconds. Everyone here could destroy your door in a few seconds at most. Need to get something better, by Monday. I won't even bother trying to refuse. Good. Let's get back to training. It is our best security. Izuku brought his arm over Hitachi's shoulder and strolled back deeper inside the house where Kirishima was waiting. Izuku didn't take long to meet his stare. Do you really think Bakugo could be that dangerous? Yes. Didn't he hit you with an explosion on Monday? Well, there was that one when I woke him up from the brainwashing, but that was just a little puff. For you maybe. Izuku stopped and detached from Hitachi to stand straight facing Kirishima. You hardened back then, didn't you? Well, yeah. It's basically an instinct in a situation like that. And you wouldn't call that explosion a little puff without that instinct. If you want to be a hero that protects others, you can't think about things based on how much they would hurt you. That puff could have at the very least burned skin or even blinded someone else, probably worse. Kirishima opened his mouth to respond, closed it. and looked down thoughtful. Slowly, Izuku could see a bit of shame appear in his expression. I didn't think about it that way. No, you didn't. That's why you are going to practice using your brain in a fight for the afternoon. You are going to train with Toshi while I work with Tinya, and afterwards you are going to do 10 push UPS for every time he manages to brainwash you, if you want dinner that is. Kirishima smiled. Is that supposed to be a threat? I'll do 20. You are supposed to avoid getting brainwashed. Oh, right. Izuku shook his head. Let's get going. Where? Kirishima asked. To a beach, Tinya, and I can't do our next training here. You brought a swimming suit like I asked. Yes. I was wondering why. Don't forget the papers, Tinya added. Izuku took the written permission from a private beach club, and the same legal papers he carried while they trained for the entrance exams. Kirishima looked around as they stepped through the gate of the beach club, a large wooden building looking over the beach with a massive terrace as long as the building. Oh, this place. My parents like to come here during summer. Do they really let us train here? Oh, Midoriya-san. An older man in a fancy suit approached. I am happy to see you here again, and, with more friends than before I see. I'm sorry, I feel I have seen you before but... This is Kirishima. He is our classmate who joined us for weekend training. Ah, young Kirishima. I didn't recognize you with the new hair color. The man focused back on Izuku. We have restricted your area of the beach. The dinner will be ready at the same time as before. Please let me know if you need anything else. So, I guess they do let us train here. They do. My father owns this place, Izuku said. Except you two are going to train in the water. The water resistance makes moving around a bit more difficult that way, and you don't need to worry about throwing each other around. You mean Kirishima tossing me around? Either he drinks seawater by the end of the day, and not because of brainwashing, or you will join him in doing push UPS. We can have a competition. Kirishima smirked without the least concern about Izuku's threats, and Izuku found it difficult not to feel happy to have the redhead around as they passed a restaurant and headed to the dressing rooms. As soon as Izuku got his shirt off, he reached to feel the lumps that were his new jet quirk. He wasn't used to them and could barely avoid being constantly distracted by the foreign sensations. Now he had to train using them without breaking his bones like the previous evening. There weren't too many people on the beach that early in the spring, despite the day being relatively warm for the time, at least warm enough to be comfortable. Though even Kirishima's smile briefly wavered as soon as he stepped into the water. Izuku stood just beyond the water line next to Tinya, who was describing how he felt his engines and controlled their power, with some extra tips from his hero brother Ingenium. Izuku had already figured out how to activate the quirk, but controlling it, let alone his movement, was a whole different matter. The slits in his back opened and started blasting out air, a little too much of it. Izuku's feet left the ground, and he was already well over the water before he managed to lean back enough to halt his forward momentum. After almost falling on his back, he spread his arms, dipped his foot in the water, and managed to balance himself upright, kind of hovering over the water. Good, now focus on keeping the output stable as you try to move, Tinya called out behind him. Izuku did his best, but as he leaned forward, he moved a little too fast, tried to change direction, accidentally changed the power output of the quirk, and landed face first in the water, almost exactly at the same time as Hitachi a few meters away. Hitachi got up, spitting seawater, and glanced at Izuku. Nice to see you on your face for once. Don't get used to it, Izuku responded, and his jets flared. Let me have this. Usually it's you who makes people eat dirt, mostly me. At least it was premium dirt at a central location, Izuku said and softly elbowed Hitachi's side. And this is premium seawater at an expensive beach club, Hitachi shot back, splashing water on Izuku. So go and make Kirishima drink some, Izuku responded, but that made Hitashi's smile disappear. Izuku put his hand on Hitashi's shoulder. I know he's strong, especially after fighting him all morning, but you can't let that make you doubt yourself. Doing so will just make you hesitate and do worse. Even when he is using his quirk, just remember you can also do things that he can't, even if they aren't physical. I guess, though my arms are already hurting from thinking about all the push UPS. That means they work, but how about this? If I slam into the water more times than you, I'll join you in doing the push UPS. Deal. All four of them were still doing push UPS when the sun went down. Tenya joined the other three just because he felt wrong not doing it with them. Favorite, story author follow, story author. Fanfiction, unleash your imagination. The Superhuman Society. If you have been waiting for Izuku and All Might to have a chat, this is the chapter for you. Also, if you want to just see Class 1A chat. Proofread by 3D Phantom. Chapter 30, a face-to-face chat. On Monday, Izuku was already in the classroom with Hitachi and Tenya when Kirishima walked in, rotating and stretching his arm. There was still a bruise on his cheek from the weekend. Hey Kirishima, Kaminari said, what happened to you? I didn't think you could bruise. You mean this? Kirishima asked, smiling and poking his cheek, flinching as he did so. Had some quirkless spars with Midoriya over the weekend. He's hardcore when it comes to training. Oh right, you mentioned planning to do that. I couldn't even think about training over the weekend after what happened. At least you still have your quirk, right? Ajiro interrupted. Wadash. Kirishima got caught off guard, confused. Hitachi tilted his head to stare at Ajiro. Do you have a problem with Izuku or are you just trying to be annoying for no reason? Of course, Ajiro started saying, turning around to face him. In an instant he froze still and fell silent. Toshi? Izuku asked. I didn't do anything. He's just too afraid to talk. It would be too much to ask to have a whole class of decent people, Izuku said. At least so far there have been more than I expected. Ajiro frowned. At least I don't depend on stealing from others. Depend. Hitachi responded before Izuku could say something rude. I think Kirishima's bruise might disagree. Yeah, he hooped my ass without quirks. Ajiro stared at them for a moment, huffed and turned to face forward. What a great way to start a week after almost dying, Jiro, a dark-haired girl said while playing with one of the headphone jacks hanging from her ears. Anyone got anything else to say? Well, a voice came from seemingly an empty flying set of clothes that was their invisible classmate Hagakure. Did you watch the news last night? Did you see how everyone in class was on screen for a second? Though I bet no one noticed me hanging in the background. Of course she was interested in getting attention from the media. Then again, being invisible had to have some effect on that desire, and she was trying to cheer everyone up, so Izuku wasn't ready to condemn her for that yet. Unfortunately, discussion after that moved to people gawking at All Might's strength. It was bad enough as things were, but now Izuku would actually have to talk with the man. Trying to distract himself from the others' discussion, Izuku happened to meet the gaze of Shoto Todoroki, the son of the number 2 hero. He looked away as soon as Izuku noticed him staring. Todoroki had been even more unsocial than himself and it was difficult to know what he might have been thinking. Todoroki's quirk was interesting, but that was just another example of what he had been handed to in this world that worshipped people just like him. After witnessing his fight against Hitachi and Ajiro, the one thing Izuku was sure of was that he should keep his guard up around the strangely two-faced classmate. At least Todoroki wasn't loudly declaring his presumed superiority like Bakugo. Also, How had his eye survived unharmed with such a wide burn and permanent damage all around it? The large clock on the classroom wall clicked forward to the next minute and something poked Izuku's shoulder. "Izuku," Tinya whispered. "It is time for the class to begin. You should make sure that everyone is already in their seats," Izuku said, "and the teacher isn't even here yet." "Hatsu," the pink girl Ashido said to the girl behind her, "so who do you think is going to teach class today?" "No idea. Mr. Izawa is still in the hospital recovering from his injuries." Hearing them talk, Izuku realized he hadn't even thought about that. He had gotten so used to injuries just disappearing he hadn't considered their teacher wouldn't be around after the battle. Great job failing to follow his own advice. Part of him felt sorry for the man like he had never felt for a teacher, other than Kurojiri that is. The door opened, revealing Izawa. He could only be recognized from his clothes and hair since every bit of skin was covered in bandages to the point it was unclear if he could even see anything. Also, the tired voice was unmistakably that of Izawa. "Good morning, class." The reactions from the class were unsurprising gasps of surprise with a louder, overly formal statement of relief from Tinya. "Are you really in any condition to teach a class?" Izuku asked as soon as things quieted down a bit. "My well-being is irrelevant," Izawa responded. Izuku wasn't sure if he should respect the man's work ethic or call him an idiot for endangering his recovery, so he didn't say anything more as Izawa continued. "What's more important is that your fight isn't over yet." Izuku kept looking at the man, expecting he'd say something about addressing Friday's events, but most of the class expressed several nervous questions. "The UA Sports Festival is about to start." That statement made the atmosphere in the room make a full 180-degree turn to loud excitement, except for Izuku, who frowned. At least some students expressed concern over security after their ears recovered from Kirishima's excited shout. Izawa's response was more of an explanation for the massively popular sports event than an answer, but eventually he got to the importance of the event for students to get noticed for career opportunities. Izuku didn't really care about that, but he saw the glint in Hitashi's eyes as Hitachi turned his head and Izuku couldn't help but smile. "Now that you have gotten excited," Izawa spoke ominously, the whole class went quiet in an instant, "we can talk about the more serious matter. Last Friday everyone here came close to being killed. At least Izawa wasn't just going to ignore it." Izuku hadn't had high expectations for any school since elementary school started, but what kind of high school would just ignore possible consequences of having an entire class almost getting killed by an army of villains? "I am glad to see you so energetic today and will not force you to talk about the events here, but everyone will have to meet with the school counselor during this week to discuss how the events might affect you. This is mandatory. I don't want to hear any excuses or claims that you can handle it. It is not talked about much publicly, but essentially every pro hero worth the title gets counseling in some form at least occasionally. If you know a pro hero who retired early and the cause wasn't an obvious physical injury, there is a 50% chance the reason was mental health related." Unlike with everything else that had been said in the class that morning, the only response to Izawa's statement was a deep silence. "You can also come look for me in the teacher's lounge after school if you want to have a one-to-one talk. Unfortunately, I must also ask you to be interviewed with a detective from the police force concerning the attack. I have a list of appointment times for both the counselor and detective here. Midoriya, have everyone pick a time before the next class." He dropped the papers from between his plastered arms on the teacher's desk and looked at the class for a long moment as if to say something more. "Class dismissed." He left the room. Izuku got up as soon as the door closed. "Well, let's get this done. Toshi, if anyone tries to leave without getting their times booked, brainwash them. We need guinea pigs to test how far your control goes. If that is what the class rep orders." "Good, start by picking your times, then guard the door," Izuku said and walked to the front of the class. "For the rest of you, it's first come first pick." If you don't want to miss hero training, better get in line quick dash. When he looked up at the class, he saw there was already a line. Well, a mix of line and mess in front of him, with Tinya at the front. The job was quickly done, but Hitachi didn't get any new guinea pigs despite guarding the door the whole time. Maybe next time, Izuku said as he left the room last with Hitachi and Tinya. Hitachi smirked. Already tired of being the volunteer? No, I've told you. It is really relaxing, though I guess that makes me tired in a way. The morning went by relatively calmly. The most unusual part was almost everyone they passed was talking about Friday's events. After the last class before lunch, a handful of Izuku's classmates had gathered right outside the classroom. One of the girls, Eureka, was loudly declaring how they would do their best, looking like a completely different person from how she had behaved previously. You are truly enthusiastic about becoming a hero, Tinya commented. Eureka's expression softened a bit and she smiled. Thank you for saying that. So why do you want to be a hero? Izuku asked, and not in a being exited to share reasons way. He spoke in the give the right answer or be judged tone. Well, Eureka started, to tell the truth, it's because of the money. Oh, Izuku's expression dropped. For some reason he actually had had some hope about her before, but with that answer he kept walking without another word, at least he tried to. He didn't get far. Ha 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 ha. The familiar obnoxious laugh made Izuku freeze stiff. All Might appeared from an adjacent hallway. Young Midoriya is here. All Might, Izuku gasped and his eyes narrowed. What do you want? Izuku's first instinct was to tell the man to go die, but he needed information from the so-called hero. We are going to get food from the cafeteria. I guess I can't tell you to not come there. Actually, All Might said, clearly taken off guard, we need. Izuku struggled to bottle up the anger and disgust the mere thought made him feel. All Might, Tinya spoke, that isn't a good idea. By now you should. Tinya, Izuku said and pulled his arm from Hitachi's hold to face the duo. He drew a deep breath. It's okay. There is something he needs to get done and he won't leave me alone before he does it. Hitachi stared at him for a long moment. Does he know she was? Hitachi pressed his lips together to not say too much. Yes, but there is also another thing. Izuku paused for a long moment. I won't promise that both of us come out alive, but reserve a seat for me. Okay, Hitachi said, call us if you need to. Izuku nodded and turned towards All Might. Show the way and make this quick. Good, All Might said after a short silence, there is a room in the teacher's lounge we can talk in privately. He gestured Izuku to follow and turned his back. It was such an attractive target to stab, but that wasn't enough anymore, and having seen the man's power it couldn't have been that easy. All Might led him to a small quiet room with some couches and a low table. He gestured for Izuku to sit on a chair opposite the sofa All Might himself sat on with an audible sigh. Izuku looked around, scanning the room and identifying all possible exits. So, it is safe to talk here? He asked in an emotionless tone. Yes, no one will hear or see us here, All Might responded while Izuku's finger tapped his fancy wristwatch. The one he had gotten from his father. He could barely sit still, being essentially trapped in the room with the man he hated the most in this world, other than the sludge villain that killed his mother, that is. Better tear the band-aid off quickly. So, are you going to stop pretending? We both know that isn't how you really look, and I'm guessing it puts some kind of strain on you. Otherwise you would not have changed at the USJ. All Might sighed. You are right. There was a literal puff of smoke and the oversized, inhumanly muscular All Might disappeared, leaving behind only a skeletal man who was barely taller than Izuku and looked like he could be blown over by a gust of wind. He actually looked like someone Izuku could have beaten in a fight even before his father's training. Even knowing the man was going to change, the difference was so jarring Izuku was left speechless, only able to stare. His brain was struggling to process what he was witnessing as it went against everything he had seen or been told by the entire world around him. How? He couldn't help asking despite already knowing the basics. His voice didn't even have the usual animosity towards the man. All Might opened his mouth as if to respond, but remained quiet, staring at Izuku, or perhaps his hair. He even closed his eyes and breathed in deep before speaking. The work of a hero is dangerous, even with my power. There was a fight 6 years ago that was especially bad. All Might reached for the bottom of his shirt and pulled it up on the left side. His left side was a single massive scar around a single point, as if a hole had been there. Izuku a year earlier would have jolted from shock and felt ill just from seeing the injury. But that had been a year ago. A villain did this to me, All Might continued. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and my stomach was removed. I've wasted away because of the after effects of those surgeries. I can only. He fell quiet and stared at Izuku again. My quirk is very powerful, but it requires a body capable of wielding that power, so now it takes a lot out of me. I have to pace myself completely differently than before. He was leaving something out, but how much could Izuku push questions without being suspicious? So, the number one hero isn't so far above everyone else like he'd like us to think. I would not phrase it like that, but you aren't wrong. I have been able to thus far hide this from the public. The symbol of peace cannot be seen wavering. Why? Because you wouldn't fit the society that has been built to your image. Izuku snapped. Welcome to the club. All Might sighed. I see we have to clear some air before anything else. Listen, I know that. You failed to save my mother and were more interested in posing for the cameras like you had accomplished a great victory, despite her corpse laying right next to you. More worried about the cameras than letting her family know what happened. Why bother telling them you failed to save her yourself, when the police are just your lackeys? That time I made a mistake. It is important for people to see the symbol of peace, but I think I thought I had come just in time and didn't immediately understand she was gone, dead, killed while a bunch of heroes refused to even try to save her because it wasn't easy fame, and you were too busy basking in that fame to even check on her. It's not like. Don't bother pretending. You milk that fame just the same as almost all heroes and either don't understand or don't care about all the suffering you are not just standing on, but creating. What do you mean? Izuku huffed at the man's apparent ignorance. When one group of people are put on the pedestal above everyone else, everyone will inevitably be compared to that. If you have a quirk similar to top heroes, one that looks flashy and cool, just what you need to show off to cameras, everyone thinks you are going to have a great future. If not, well, the whole idea of heroes comes with the concept of villains. All Might kept looking at him without showing signs of understanding. If you aren't heroic, you are either useless or a villain, and a lot of the time your actual actions don't matter to that judgment. All Might's eyes widened in surprise or shock and he opened his mouth, probably to say something stupid. Don't even try to deny it, or pretend you are any better. I've seen how you look at me since the first time we met. I know you have been spying on. I mean, investigating me since then. Couldn't accept someone having a quirk that didn't fit your idea of a hero? Or maybe you just don't want a power to exist that could take away yours. No wait, it's not that. Well, not exactly. Izuku held back guessing what was coming. Your quirk isn't as unique as you might think. There was one other person with the same power. It isn't called quirk transfer. The name of your quirk is All for One. Those 3 words were enough to completely throw All Might off balance. He was left staring, mouth hanging open. How do? Tinya and I had a history assignment on him. Good thing the people at Tsume didn't know what my real quirk was. They would have reacted the same as you. After all, Why bother with what kind of person someone is or what they actually do when it's so easy to judge them on what they could potentially do? All Might's skeletal shoulders slumped and he looked down, acting like he was ashamed. I guess, they would. I never thought. Doesn't seem to be your strong suit, Izuku responded and tapped into the calm mind to not forget why he was talking to the man in the first place. You shouldn't be a teacher if you can't help but compare your students to ancient villains. He wasn't some ancient villain. All for One might not have been much in the public eye since the current hero system was established, but he was still alive until recently. I don't know how. He probably got a life-extending quirk from someone, but he was still controlling most of the underworld when you were a child. He only died 6 years ago. I only killed him 6 years ago, or at least I thought I did. That, I didn't know, Izuku lied, hanging onto the calm mind to not show his emotions about All Might's statements. A few seconds later he raised his head. You thought you killed him? All Might sighed and stood up. He stepped next to the window to look outside. Clearly, he couldn't help but do unnecessary theatrics even when in his walking skeleton form. It was a brutal fight. It was when I got my injuries. By the end I had crushed his head and was barely alive myself. I was sure I had killed him, at least I was until last Friday. Now Izuku was genuinely interested in what the man had to say, and worried. Friday, the USJ. He said. That creature, the Nomua, it had multiple quirks. I fear All for One might have been involved in its creation, All Might stated. There are many mysteries about All for One and how it works, but one thing I know for sure is that normal people aren't meant to have many quirks, can't handle many quirks. All Might finally turned to face Izuku rather than the window, with an unspoken question in his eyes. Izuku diverted his gaze before responding. I have noticed there is a strain when I have gotten new quirks, but it goes away eventually. That's why I've never given anyone more than one quirk at a time. It is good you didn't. I have heard that when people were given more quirks than they could handle, it would overcome their conscious minds, leaving them in a mindless semi-conscious state, a bit like the Nomua. It seems it cannot think on its own or do anything without being ordered to. Cannot, are you saying it survived the fight? Izuku said, exaggerating his surprise. Yes. Police found it in a forest some distance away. It was taken to the villain hospital for the moment, but the thing wasn't the least bit injured. Seems the only reason I won was because I separated it from the person giving it orders with that last punch. So it was that strong, Izuku said. Can you even keep something that powerful imprisoned? Sounds like the League of Villains could free it just by shouting orders through a window. That is a concern, but it is going to be transferred to Tartarus in a week or so that should be okay. If it survived my attack, there isn't anywhere else we could keep it. Izuku tried to shut up, but couldn't help himself having gotten what information he could. Did you intentionally aim it at a forest, or did you just get lucky that it didn't crash through a building or two? Did you ever even consider people around you while fighting? Midoriya. What made you think it was a good idea to throw that thing towards your students? I had to carry Toshi out of USJ and he was lucky nothing worse happened. I guess I should have known though, it's not like someone who can pose like a winner next to a corpse would care about a random student getting hurt. You probably think of him too as a potential villain, don't you? I bet you never expected to meet someone like him at UA with how the school's entrance exam is built for heroic quirks. I did not make the most careful choices back then, but that fight was the hardest I have faced since All for One and I had to hurry before my power failed to keep you and your friends safe. Izuku huffed and looked away from the man. It would be a cold day in hell when he needed All Might's help to keep his friends safe. Then an idea sparked in his head. If you have become too weak to protect those around you, maybe you should step aside and leave the whole symbol of peace thing to someone else. Even your quirk wouldn't need to go to waste. If it was to replace you, I could help by transferring it. All Might's eyes widened, and he seemed to forget to breathe. A few seconds later he coughed blood on his hand. Thank you for your offer, but I still have things to do as a hero and, my quirk is very powerful and demanding. It would be dangerous to try to take or give it to someone else. As you want, but you better not fail people because you refuse to give up the fame. If you change your mind, find someone who is worthy. Being a teacher here should help. UA is biased, but someone here has to be worthy enough, even besides Toshi and Tinya. Izuku paused for a moment, genuinely thoughtful. Giving it to Tokoyami, Dark Shadow might be too dangerous if your quirk powers other quirks like your body, but Kirishima could probably split the Mount Fuji if your quirk and his could be combined. Yes. I am sure someone is, many young heroes surely are. I am certain someone will continue my work. Better I hope, Izuku said and got up. My friends are waiting for me. Did you have anything else you wanted to say? All Might opened his mouth. You don't want me to tell anyone about your condition, Izuku interrupted, followed by a long silence. Before All Might could speak, Izuku walked to the door. Then don't piss me off and never mention my mother again. He left the room and walked down the hall quickly to get some distance. Gradually his steps slowed down until he stepped into a small side corridor. A quick glance confirmed he was alone. He released the calm mind and collapsed against the wall, grasping his shirt. He drew deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. Hearing approaching steps didn't help that. Izuku tensed and straightened his back until Tinya and Hitachi stepped around a corner. Tinya noticed him first. Seems you were right, he said, directing Hitachi's attention to where Izuku was. They both walked to Izuku. You know you don't need to pretend like whatever happened didn't affect you, Hitachi told Izuku, who relaxed and leaned on the wall again. Depends on who is around, Izuku responded quietly. No one else. So do you want to talk about it? Tinya asked. No, at least not right now. Can we assume that the big man is still alive? Hitachi asked. Unfortunately. When you are ready, we should head to the cafeteria so as not to be late to the next lesson, and you need to sit down. Izuku looked at Tinya and breathed in deep. Okay. They headed towards the cafeteria with Tinya and Hitachi flanking Izuku on both sides. They found an empty table and ate with just the three of them. As they got to class for afternoon hero classes, the trio was left surprisingly unharassed, although both Kirishima and Tokoyami glanced at Izuku as he settled down. Shoji had an extra eye on one of his hands on Izuku's side that disappeared as soon as Izuku turned to see it. At least Izuku could appreciate the day's lesson on laws as a part of the hero training more than most of his classmates, even if he wouldn't have agreed with all of the laws of the country. By the time Izuku left at the end of the day, some peers, like Kirishima and Kaminari, were laying on their desks like they had been worked to exhaustion. Kirishima, Hitachi said with a slight smirk, don't tell me some books can defeat the manliest guy in the class. It's not the books, it's trying to remember everything in them, Kirishima groaned and raised his head from the desk. I guess there are negatives to having such a thick skin. Books don't get through any more than punches. Haha, Kirishima responded dryly and dragged himself up. If there is something all high school students have in common, it is that they are never too tired to leave school. If you plan to uphold the law as a hero, you should at least know what you are upholding, Izuku said as he finished closing his backpack. His voice was missing much of the judgmental sharpness such comments often came with. His attention soon moved elsewhere, distracted by a noise coming from outside the room. I wonder what is going on out there, Eureka said as she headed to the door. Lot of people clearly, Izuku said as Eureka reached the door. Izuku was proven correct when a large crowd was revealed, the people at the front barely holding back from being pushed into the class by the pressure of the crowd. Izuku stopped, still next to his desk, unwilling to get any closer to the crowd. What's going on? Eureka stuttered, staring at the people gathered outside their classroom, looking in at them. What business do you all have with Class A? Tinya questioned the crowd. Either news about Friday got to the rest of the school and they're worried for us, Hitachi said, or they realized the sports festival is approaching and want to check out the competition. Of course, the whole event pretty much focuses on the hero course students, Izuku said. Not just that, Hitachi added, people are sometimes allowed to transfer to the hero course and making an impression at the first sports festival is pretty much the only serious opportunity to do so. Of course, normally there is the issue of the course having only space for a limited number of people, but with Bakugo getting kicked out there is an open seat, Izuku finished, and glanced at Hitachi. How do you know transfer opportunities so well? We both know how my chances at the entrance exam were. Even with your training, the sports festival always seemed like the more likely way in. If things were just a little different, I might be right there testing how easy it is to provoke you into responding to my words. Haha, so this is the famous Class 1A, not impressed. A new student had gotten through the crowd to stand in front of the doorway. A single glance at his arrogant glee was enough for Izuku to classify him in the group of people he didn't like. Shouldn't there be more of you? Oh right, the crazy got kicked out. Did you hear? Someone in Class A was so insane he didn't even last 1 week without being expelled. Izuku mentally reclassified the student as loud and annoying, but not the worst. At this rate you'll run out of students before the sports festival. Maybe then the rest of us can get to school without being harassed by those reporters. Surely they're going to show up again now that the mighty 1A has fought actual villains. I hope anyone isn't hoping to get noticed at the sports festival. They are going to steal all of the attention with that. He got some annoyed rumbling from people behind him. Izuku wasn't sure how to feel about him anyway. It was getting difficult to keep track of what he was saying. Well, that isn't going to happen. We might not have reporters running after us yet, but just wait. Class 1B will. A hand swung from behind him and chopped the loud one's neck with great precision. The loud one collapsed immediately and was caught by the collar of his shirt. A smiling girl with long orange hair was revealed as the loud blonde fell out of the way. Hey, my name is Itsuka Kendo, nice to meet you. Sorry about Monoma. He can get a bit overexcited about some things. Monoma. Izuku blinked as the name registered in his mind. Well, we'll be off before he gets going again. Wait, Izuku said and stepped forward, much to Hitachi's and Tinya's surprise. Did you call him Monoma? Yes. Kendo responded and left behind an unspoken question. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku introduced himself and fell quiet for a moment before continuing. Is he the one who can copy quirks? Huh. The question caught Kendo by surprise, but soon her eyes narrowed. So she wasn't just a careless fool. How do you know that, and why would it matter? Recovery Girl mentioned it when talking about my quirk. Izuku paused and hesitated. I have the quirk transfer quirk. The one those reporters called the quirk stealer. Those words invoked the expected gasps and whispers from the crowd, which suddenly moved a few arms reaches further away, except Kendo, who still stood in the same place, perhaps a bit tenser. Izuku bit his teeth together from the familiar reaction, barely noticing the new sets of steps that approached from behind and joined the previous two. Soon a large shadow rose over him, literally. Dark Shadow reached over Izuku and looked at the crowd that got a little further away. He saved Fumi and we haven't gotten him the house yet, so back off. Oh, wait, you already did. So, step closer. Dark Shadow. Get back here. Izuku had to resist chuckling at the sentient quirk's antics now that it didn't want him dead anymore, but he couldn't stop a smile from getting on his face. I believe you were talking about this guy, Hitachi said, pointing at Monoma, followed by a light elbow to Izuku's side. I haven't seen you that interested in anyone before. I heard he can copy quirks. I wanted to see if we could use our quirks together. What? Hitachi asked. I see, Tinya interrupted. If you can take the copied quirk, you could have people's quirks without actually taking the original. Together you could have and give away an unlimited number of quirks. Maybe, Izuku said. I have never encountered a copying quirk, and I don't know how his works. That's... Kendo started. Ha, Monoma said, almost sitting on the floor hanging by Kendo's grasp of his shirt. So even Class A's mighty quirk stealer needs help from Class B. Are 1A quirks really that pitiful you need to come after us, Alria, Dysprosium? Monoma fell quiet as he met Izuku's stare. It mainly carried a mix of tiredness and annoyance, but it was a stare from someone trained to kill. They have fine quirks, but some of them might be worthy of keeping those quirks. So far I can't say the same about you. Izuku, Tinya sighed. If I hadn't already seen how well UA's admission process works, I would ask how someone with your attitude got in, Hitachi said to Monoma. Oh, and if you call Izuku a quirk stealer again, I will brainwash you with my quirk and make you walk into the cafeteria naked during the lunch hour. Hitachi. Tinya said louder. What am I going to do with you two? That sounds fun, can I watch? Dark Shadow. Monoma's eyes darted between each of them with growing concern covering up the annoying arrogance. It was more satisfying but didn't really help Izuku get what he wanted. Now it was his turn to sigh as he held the back of his neck in the gesture he had picked up from Hitachi. I'm not going to play your hate the other class game, he said. Your actions matter more than the letter in your class name. If you want to be an actual hero, you should seek to know the limits and potential of your quirk. It could be the difference between life and death, especially for the people around you. You know where to find me when you are ready to learn more about your quirk. Izuku stepped forward and passed Monoma, who was still sitting on the floor. The remaining crowd parted from his way, keeping out of arm's reach. A few steps followed him before stopping. But naked, and I'll make sure someone has a camera ready, Hitachi said before catching up with Izuku. I'm sorry for them, Tinya spoke as the two were getting further away, but you really shouldn't treat him like that. None of us choose our quirk, well I mean the ones we are born with. Of course, in his case I thought he was bad too, but he's okay. Come on, Dark Shadow. So, Izuku said to Hitachi who was now next to him. You are now threatening people with your quirk. Hey, you aren't exactly in a position to complain. How many people have you threatened, or broken the chin of for my sake? I'm just thinking back to when I had to convince you to even show us how it works. I'm glad to see how far you've come. Oh. I hope I didn't get into trouble with that though. After everything else they have failed to stop, you better not, Izuku said. By the way, I booked my interview with the detective to start in a moment, so you and Tinya need to wait a bit if you want a ride. That's fine. With Tinya around we'll probably get our homework done before you finish. Favorite, story author follow, story author, fanfiction unleash your imagination. Tinya is doing his best. Please, come in. Izuku followed the invitation and stepped into the staff cabinet room turned temporary interrogation chamber, or at least that was what it felt like to him while facing Detective Tsukachi and another police officer from across the table. He was already drawing on the calm mind as much as he dared to, not wanting to appear odd. The story of how the events at USJ happened and how he felt about them was clear in his mind, and the rest of the world didn't exist except for the two men in front of him. He sat down, maintaining a neutral expression. The police officer started a voice recorder. Please state your name, Tsukachi said. Izuku Midoriya. You were one of the Class 1A students present during the U.S.J incident. Yes. Please describe in your own words what happened from the beginning. Thankfully the events had been set so that Izuku didn't really need to lie about his actions, just his surprise and some of his feelings of the situations, and even those were dominated by genuine fear he had felt for his friend. He both naturally and purposefully let that come through in his description to cover his other feelings. Midoriya, I am not sure if you have noticed, but during this whole discussion you have not expressed feeling any fear for your own safety. Were you not afraid with actual villains trying to kill you? It was a shock at first, but I didn't have time to fear, for myself. Only others. Yes. You were focused on their safety, not your own. Was that your main focus while fighting? Yes. Why are you asking about this? Are you aware of the level of injuries you inflicted? Yes. In other areas the villains suffered severe frostbites and dangerous levels of electric shocks, but the Storm Dome where you fought had by far the most severely injured villains with burns, piercing wounds from shrapnel, and broken bones. It is miracle none of them seem to be in danger of dying anymore. They tried to kill Toshi, and Tokoyami. They are lucky they failed. Why is that? Because I would have killed. Izuku paused. With the calm mind there hadn't been the emotions that would have usually stopped him from blurting out the words. You would have killed them? Tsukachi asked and discreetly slid his hand forward on the table to touch Izuku's. It was too late to make up a different response. Probably, he responded truthfully. There have been a couple of times my friends have been threatened or in danger. Those times are a bit of a haze, but I know I would kill to keep them safe, and they know that much. At USJ I had enough time to aim in front of the attackers and not at them with my explosive attacks to not kill them, but I wouldn't risk Hitashi's safety to spare the villains from the shrapnel. It stopped most of them at once. And the one whose quirk you took. The words didn't hold any more judgment than the previous comments on the violence Izuku had inflicted on the villains, but the other police officer seemed tenser and stared at Izuku more constantly. I barely stopped him from decapitating Tokoyami. Then he tried to kill Hitachi. I was too slow. The only way I could have stopped him in time was to aim to kill and. That time Dark Shadow was faster, but the villain could still have gotten back into the air, so I stopped him and took his quirk. Do you intend to return the quirk? No. Do you have any more questions about what actually happened there? Did you notice anything odd or specific about any of the villains? Mostly I was surprised we could beat them relatively easily, and I mean the whole class. They or someone leading them was good enough to trap us in the dome, but most of the villains were out of their league against fresh high school students. There only seemed to be like two really dangerous ones, besides the creature that fought All Might. The leader and the one with the teleportation quirk. You and your classmates also fought impressively. I think we are done here. Do you have any questions? Have you arrested Bakugo yet? No, he is still missing, though the city has had a number of noise complaints about explosion-like sounds. It's him. His quirk is as loud as himself, Izuku said, squeezing his hand in a fist. What was the firecracker doing? A book hit the wall hard enough to crack it? It was one of the books Katsuki had gotten for UA, Laws of Heroism or something else stupid. Now it was just a reminder of the shitty situation he was in, all because of that Deku villain. It was bad enough that that rich bastard bought out the school and got him expelled. Now he might get imprisoned, and for what? For keeping that Deku in his proper place when no one else would? He was the one who had stolen Katsuki's quirk twice and was still trying to do so. He doesn't have an option. The old hag shouted downstairs. If he doesn't give up his quirk he is going to prison. He won't have much use for it there and our family will be ruined even after he gets out. Whenever that might be. He couldn't even count on his own mother. For all the attitude she always gave him, she was just going to bow down to Deku's demands. How could we fail so badly at raising him? Despite everything Midoriya is doing, he is right about that. How did Katsuki end up like this? Katsuki gritted his teeth. His mother wasn't just bowing down to Deku, but taking his side. Still fuming, Katsuki looked for something to destroy, but his eyes kept returning to the news stream about what had happened earlier that afternoon. UA Hero class had been attacked by villains. His class had been attacked by villains. He was supposed to be there beating up real villains. Taking out a bunch of villains on his first week at hero school would have showed everyone what he was capable of. Paved his way to greatness faster. And Deku had taken that from him too. Small explosions crackled on both of his palms. He wanted to destroy something, preferably something with white hair. The deadline is today. We have to tell them we agree. I know he doesn't want it, but, after how he has acted, maybe being quirkless shocks him to a better path. His quirk is what this all started with. Maybe not having it is better for him. Like hell it was. No one was going to take Katsuki's quirk, again, and live. His parents could die and go to hell for all he cared if they thought he was going to hand everything over to Deku. He was already strong enough to be a hero. He didn't need them. Katsuki left his room, being quiet for the first time since waking up, and sneaked into his parents' bedroom. It only took a few seconds to get the cash stash the old hag kept there. He had already packed everything else into his backpack. He pushed open the window. For someone like him it didn't matter, it was on the second floor. Even if he couldn't use explosions to fly off because of the noise, it was effortless for him to just slide down a drain pipe. He ran off the lot and behind a corner faster than his parents could walk up the stairs. Then he walked. He would have loved to walk straight to the Deku's house and blow it up, but he didn't know where it was. At school he hadn't exactly cared about where that villain lived. All he knew was Sume. That engine for Brain had mentioned going there with Deku, so he lived somewhere in that region. Still, Katsuki wasn't going to just walk around hoping to randomly run into that bastard. That engine for Brain's friend of Deku's would be easier to find, being from a famous hero family and all. Still a headache. Family of pro heroes could be a bit much even for Katsuki, for the moment. He'd need to keep up his training. He'd be stronger than any of the extras that stayed at UA. First, he needed a place to stay somewhere his parents wouldn't find him, also cheap. The money he took wouldn't last long if he didn't acquire more and use it sparingly. So he kept walking towards the poorest and shoddiest part of the city. Soon the sun was going down and the surrounding buildings cast long shadows over him. He noticed several people sitting on the sides of the road or walking shakily, probably on something. A woman walked across the street quickly, looking around every few seconds. Katsuki strutted down the street like he owned the place, only dreaming about someone trying to mess with him. He should have been there as a hero, making villains terrified just by walking by. A shadow moved next to him. "Hey, if you don't want to get hurt, give," he yelped when Katsuki caught him by surprise by grabbing the wrist of the knife hand. A single yank pulled the fish-faced guy off balance and brought his face straight into a meeting with Katsuki's other fist. The knife clinked against the asphalt of the street. A mere moment later a larger thump followed. Katsuki pressed his foot on the worthless loser's chest and shook his hands in disgust to get rid of slime sticking to them. Damn mutant. Even quirkless losers at least aren't physically revolting. The fishman tried to get up to lunge at Katsuki, who kicked him in the head, knocking out the would-be robber with no real effort. He hadn't even needed to use his quirk to deal with the slimy villain at least as fast as pro heroes. Katsuki grinned. It was a grin that would make parents usher their kids away, but a grin nonetheless. They thought he needed to rot 3 years in some hero kindergarten to beat up villains and be a hero. He'd show them. He'd show them all by beating so many villains the heroes of the city would be left out of work. UA would regret kicking him out when he became the number one without them, and then He would crush that insignificant bug Deku who dared to get in his way. With the media now properly aware of that quirk-stealing villain, everyone would know who was the villain and who was the hero. Katsuki's stomach rumbled. He'd still have to feed himself until people recognized his greatness. He looked down towards the still unconscious fishman and his slightly bulging pocket. He crouched down to take the would-be robber's wallet. "You tried to rob me, so it's only fair you compensate me, wouldn't you say? Who better to pay for the hero's work than the villains?" The wallet had a bunch of cash and a ring, probably stolen from some weakling who couldn't take care of themselves. Katsuki dropped the wallet and started counting the money. A photograph slipped from between the bills. It was of some little fish girl, who was probably smiling. It was hard to say with a face like that. Katsuki tossed the picture away from his money. Just mutants robbing people to breed more mutants. He glanced down at the fishman. He couldn't just call the police and hand him over. The old hag had probably already sent them after Katsuki. Still, the fishman would just go rob some weakling if Katsuki left him here. He raised his foot and slammed it down on the scaly wrist, breaking it. The unconscious fishman jolted but was still out cold. Bakugo repeated the same for the other wrist. "Let's see you use a knife now." He walked away, looking for more villains and a dry place to eat at as rain clouds rolled over the city and the unconscious villain. He'd probably be fine. Why would a fish mind some rain? Fanfiction, unleash your imagination. J. Carlson 96, I assume, good, I can feel your anger. I am defenseless. Take your quirk. Strike me down with all your hatred. Izuku tried to imagine intending to kill his father while drawing out as much of the killing intent quirk's power as he could, but it was difficult since he didn't really harbor any hatred for his father, let alone enough to want to kill him. Is that all the hatred you can feel? Do I have to bring Inko into this again? Don't you dare! Izuku shouted. His father shook for just an instant. Good, good. I could really feel that. I wonder how you would react to me mentioning someone else, or specifically two people, who are actually still alive, for now. Dad. Izuku shouted and lit a dragon blade on one of his hands. His father took a step back, a first as far as Izuku remembered, and they ended up in a standstill staring at each other, as much as his father could stare without eyes, that is. It lasted until his father burst out in laughter. Good, Izuku, good. Let the hate flow through you. It will make your quirk stronger. If you can impact me here, enemies on the battlefield will freeze in terror in front of you. I thought I was supposed to learn how to control the quirk to suppress it. The control that allows you to draw out its full power is the same control you need to suppress it or control it so that people don't even realize you are using a quirk on them. That makes sense, but are you sure we should be spending this much time on it? I am still struggling with the jets, and I can't use them at the sport festival if I just fly out of bounds. Winning at the festival is a secondary goal. You have dedicated much time to the skills and quirks you can use in public as Izuku Midoriya, but you must be able to also act in the shadows as Shirakuro. Do not forget you are at UA to gather information. I know. I found out where the Nomu is being held, didn't I? But the Nomu is still being held there. I'm going to get it out on Monday when they try to move it. Good. Then if that's settled, let's focus back on the training so you will be ready for that mission. Now, think about killing me. Make me really feel that bloodlust. Would be a shame if I had to drag some random criminal from the streets to play with you again to bring it out. Izuku gritted his teeth. Good, good, I can feel your anger, his father said, unless you activated the quirk by accident, tisk tisk tisk. Izuku drew a deep breath. It was going to be a long evening. At least the weekend was starting, so it was his turn to be the slave driver and go for a swim. Izuku's toes brushed against the water as he wavered from side to side, but he managed to stay somewhat upright without dipping fully into the water below him, gliding forward using his jets as Tinya ran to keep up with him along the beach. "Okay, are you ready to turn?" Tinya called out. "As ready as I'm going to be. Remember to adjust for the change in balance when you turn to maintain your momentum." It was easier said than done. The rapid changes in momentum and balance took all of Izuku's concentration to even hope to adjust to. He was tempted to tap into the calm mind, but it was dangerous with Tinya and Hitachi present to notice odd behaviors, and he didn't want to depend on the quirk. He turned his upper body, redirecting the jets. He could feel his center of gravity shift. He bent back to counter it. The move messed up his direction of thrust. Suddenly the surface of the water was right in front of his eyes. There was a loud splash. Izuku sighed while still underwater, producing bubbles before he turned upright and brought his head over the surface. He was still blinking water out of his eyes when there was another splash nearby. Both Hitachi and Kirishima scrambled to get back, standing up in their shallower water. "Toshi!" Izuku called out while wading towards them. "Did you finally take him down without your quirk?" "I wouldn't call that taking him down," Hitachi responded, "more like falling together. Still better than you did last weekend. All you needed was to make sure you land on top and keep him down until he fainted from the lack of oxygen." Both Hitachi and Kirishima stared at him for a long time in silence. "If it was a real fight, I mean." "Right, hat. You on the other hand," Izuku said, interrupting Kirishima. "You are still physically much stronger than Toshi. Even if you both fell down and even if he was on top of you, you should have been able to turn the tables before running out of air even without your quirk. Wasn't the fight over already though? If you think a fight is over before you win, you have already lost." "Maybe I should get a notebook too," Hitachi said, "for all the Izuku proverbs and motivational speeches." "You can have one of my empty ones," Izuku said, "they're on one of the lower shelves in the library." "Oh thanks," Hitachi answered with a blatant lack of seriousness. "Try to keep over the surface," Izuku said and turned to leave them. "Right back at you." Izuku smiled as he waded back towards the beach and Tinya. As he approached, he flared his jets enough to lift him out of the water. He couldn't fly properly yet, but he was more than capable of jumping even with some extra kick to make it an inhumanly long leap. Seconds later his feet sunk into soft sand as his legs flexed to absorb the impact. There wasn't even the tiniest waver as he landed and stood back up. At least his balance was fine. It was just adjusting to the new quirk that was the problem. He faced Tinya. "So how did it look to you?" "It seemed fine at first. You were able to redirect yourself, and as far as I could tell you were balancing quite well, against the initial change in direction, but you had to move to do that, so there was a change you also would have had to counter, but that, thinking like that it could go around forever. Balancing change from trying to balance other change, and the quirk itself doesn't offer much help for that. I can't change their direction enough to have much control. I'm starting to see why the villain used a wingsuit. I might have to rethink my hero costume. I'm already planning modifications to use these jets without ripping it apart. Still, that way would be too limiting for battle. Do you have any other suggestions to improve this training? I'm afraid I'm out of ideas. Our trainings have similar needs, but the quirks are really quite different. Even though my engines can provide thrust somewhat similarly, having them on my legs is quite different from your jets. There is only one other thing I can think of." Izuku's head perked up. "My brother's quirk is much more similar to your jets, and he has had his own problems with changing directions at high speed. He has a free evening on Monday and wanted to see how my training has gone. He has said he'd like to meet you too, so we could see if he can help you." "That would be great, but I can't on Monday," Izuku responded. He forced a wide smile on his face while locking away the voice screaming liar, in his head. Dad is flying in briefly during a business trip, so we are going to spend the evening in Tokyo together. Oh, I'm happy to hear that. You shouldn't worry about training during that time then. Tensei is also usually busy, but I'm sure you can meet eventually. I think he is planning to have a short vacation after the sports festival. Yes, we should set up something. I don't think I'm going to be able to use this at the festival anyway, or at least not much. I doubt that. You have a tendency to surprise people, especially when it comes to quirks, Tinya said. Him and Hitachi really had too much confidence in Izuku, especially in other matters. Izuku didn't respond but simply stood there looking as Kirishima pulled Hitachi almost all the way out of the water before slamming him down again. It was a welcome challenge for Hitachi, but if Kirishima kept dominating this much, they'd have to adjust the training. When he avoided Hitachi's brainwashing, the redhead, despite also not using his own quirk, had proven to be even tougher for Hitachi to beat than Izuku had estimated. I'm not sure if you have noticed, Tinya said, but you have seemed more relaxed and natural with Kirishima around than last week. Have I? Absolutely. I know it wasn't the easiest thing for you, but look at what happened when you gave someone a chance. One person. I hope it's only the first of many. Well, actually more like the third, sixth, seventh, maybe, Izuku corrected rather than try to counter Tinya's point. Does that include your parents? Yes. You should know I and Hitachi plan to grow that number further. Izuku wasn't sure how to respond, but he had to stomp out and bury alive the same voice that previously called him a liar. He swallowed before speaking. You've spent the whole afternoon helping my training. We should do something to help you too. Perhaps get some more sparring in. Are you sure? You just said you are worried about being able to use the quirk for the festival. I'll see if I can get some use in during training. I think that is better for the festival than trying to master flying. Izuku stepped back into the water. He was doomed to fail their confidence in everything else eventually, but not necessarily in preparing them for whatever might come. Izuku glanced back as Tinya followed him into the water. Not all evenings could be about training for festivals at the beach. The next day was Monday. Izuku dropped off Hitachi and Tinya at their homes and only came home long enough to change clothes from his school uniform to regular civilian clothes, perfect for an evening in the city. There were 100 things he still wanted to check or go through, so driving all the way to Tokyo felt like a waste of time even if he knew it was important to keep his cover. He could only focus on preventing his anxiety from showing too much in the presence of the driver. I see you are excited to see your father again. Well, that had been a failure. Yes, Izuku responded briefly before realizing brief and antisocial didn't fit the situation he was supposed to be in. It's been too long. Hard to imagine, but I wasn't even at UA when he came home last time. I hope you enjoy the evening. It's definitely going to be special, Izuku said and turned to look out of the window, hoping the driver would get the message. Thankfully he was mostly quiet for the rest of the drive until stopping at the center of Tokyo in front of a bank with plenty of surveillance cameras. The spot wasn't an accident. I'll call you when I'm ready to go back, Izuku said and dropped a bunch of cash on the front seat. It could be late, so try to enjoy the evening yourself. Of course, Midoriya-san. Izuku got out and briefly stretched out his arms in front of the bank before walking down the street and once out of the sight of spying optics headed to a nearby parking garage. With a tap of a button in his wristwatch, a dark warp gate appeared in a pre-arranged dark corner of the space and he stepped through. Arriving back at his usual training hall with his father and Kurogiri waiting, he couldn't help but feel he had just wasted a ton of time, even if it had been necessary. Hello son, I'm home. How have you been? Better after the mission is done, Izuku responded as Kurogiri handed him the suitcase with his villain costume. Izuku gave the Nomu his first genuine smile of the evening. Are you ready for this? Yes, Young Shigaraki. I will complete my part of the mission as you command. Just make sure to stay safe. I'm not willing to lose you for that Nomua. I will remain safe as long as your safety does not require otherwise. Izuku blinked and glanced at his father. Did Kurogiri just say he'd disobey him? Father too had tilted his head towards the misty Nomua. Son, you should go change. It's almost time. Right, Izuku nodded, glancing at Kurogiri one more time before going. He never wanted to control Kurogiri, so he wasn't very bothered by it, but it was still surprising. In the dressing room he changed his clothes and held up his helmet. Completely covering his face was such a blessing in letting him be Shirakuro, no need to worry about what sorts of facial expressions he might make during villain work, but it also made him look like a completely different person, a person that Hitachi, Tinya, and their classmates would either fear or hate, probably both. Izuku couldn't help but wonder if Shirakuro would suffer nightmares from everything that had happened to him. He blinked at the strange notion and shook his head, pulling himself back to reality. He put the helmet on. Favorite, story author follow, story author. Fanfiction, unleash your imagination. Chapter 33, Shirakuro's debut. Izuku crouched on a rooftop with Shirakuro's helmet on and looked down at the villain hospital some distance away. The night vision made the building much clearer, and the lights of the arriving vehicles were especially easy to distinguish. A heavy door covering the entry of a loading bay opened for the approaching police van. Izuku tapped a button on the helmet to measure distance before the door closed after the van. I got your coordinates, Izuku said as he backed away from the roof edge and stood up next to Kurogiri, who had silently stood behind him. I am ready, young Shigaraki. Wait 15 more seconds. They aren't going to waste any time loading up the Nomua, but we want it in the bay. Understood. Izuku stayed quiet for a few seconds. Have we considered everything? He asked. You have prepared this mission with great care and consideration. As long as you maintain your concentration on the mission, I have no doubt of your success. Our success, Izuku corrected. It is time. With those words, several warp gates opened on the street outside the villain hospital, releasing lighter-colored low-tier Nomus like those Izuku had trained against for months, though with these he did not know who they had been before. The thought alone made him draw a deep breath through his gas filters. Try to bring them all back alive when we are done. Dad might be willing to sacrifice them all for the one high end, but I'm not. They still were people, Izuku said as another warp gate opened in front of him. Kurogiri did not say a word as Izuku stepped through. He emerged from the dark mist in the loading bay to face half a dozen pistols pointed at him. The guns gave Izuku a pause, even knowing they probably couldn't kill him even if they emptied their magazines on him. He reminded himself of that fact and steeled his resolve. The killing intent quirk burst from within as he took a step forward, seemingly unconcerned about the police officers between him and the parked van. 3 of them stepped backwards and everyone's aim got a little unsteady. Greetings, Izuku said through the voice changer and pointed at the Nomu that was already in the van, trapped inside some metal contraption covering all but its head. I have come to pick up my friend here. Shall we do this the easy way where you step out of the way, or the hard way where I leave behind 6 corpses? Izuku had kept walking closer to the open back of the van, and now only one exceptionally brave man was standing between him and the Nomua, visibly shaking but refusing to move. Izuku took the risk and, acting with all the confidence he could muster, reached out to grab the gun in the man's hand. The man didn't pull the trigger, just stood and shook. Izuku activated the vibration quirk and the gun shattered as every part shook itself apart from the others. The shock made the man drop the remains of the gun, leaving him unarmed. In panic he slashed out with a straight punch. Izuku dodged, grabbed the man's arm and with a yank switched their places, bringing the man between himself and the rest of the police, who were a little firmer with their hold of their guns now with a colleague in danger. Izuku grabbed the back to his new hostage's neck. "Drop your weapons, unless you would like to see how my quirk works on his internal organs." The man collapsed on the floor as he fainted, and a distinct stink rose from his wet pants. This surprised even Izuku. He had only gotten to test the killing intent on his father, who wasn't easy to face. 3 of the other 5 police officers inched closer, guns up now that their colleague wasn't in the way. Izuku could appreciate their bravery to resist the killing intent and the threat he had already shown himself to pose to them. That kind of people should have been the ones to go to hero schools. Still, he had a mission. "Nomu, free yourself." The Nomu responded with a loud screech, and then the metal cocoon holding it shattered in two with enough force to bend the sides of the van. The 3 police finally opened fire, but by the time their fingers moved against the triggers, the Nomu was already in front of Izuku, instinctually protecting him. The bullets did nothing to its dark skin. Once they realized this and stopped shooting, Izuku stepped next to the Nomu to face the remaining police officers with the Nomu standing over him. "You should already know this, but this Nomu was enough to push All Might's limits. How do you feel about your chances?" He paused for a few seconds. The 3 police in front of him dropped their guns and stepped out of the way. The other 2 were already out of the way, sitting on the floor to the sides. "Well, we'll be going now." Ankei, a warp gate opened where he had first entered. "Nomu, go through the warp gate." The Nomu did as ordered and walked ahead of Izuku into the gate. As soon as it was completely in, there was a quick swish. Izuku turned to respond, but he was looking for the 3 police that had opposed him, not the 2 that had collapsed on the floor. A loud bang reverberated throughout the space. Izuku's whole body shook and tensed from the impact. "Shit," was all he could say as he stumbled through the warp gate and barely balanced on the other side to stay on his feet. "Young Shigaraki, are you okay?" "I got careless," Izuku hissed. "They shot me." "Wait." There was a quiet plop and a cling as the bullet joined a puddle of blood on the rooftop. Izuku could immediately breathe a little easier. "Did you not intend to take a hostage to avoid violence?" Kurogiri asked. "I did." He collapsed, from fear, I think. Izuku drew a deep breath. "How about the other Nomus?" "Seems 2 of the 4 have been restrained and I cannot safely transport them. 2 others are fighting but damaged. There are some heroes down there. We should leave." "No," Izuku cleaned and held open his hand. "Paper." A warp gate opened and Kurogiri pulled a pile of hand paper from wherever he had been keeping it. Izuku pressed the whole pile against his side to wipe and absorb what blood he had had time to bleed. He didn't want to leave any of it behind for the police to analyze. His black costume barely showed the taint around the little hole where the bullet had entered. Izuku kept talking as he did this. "I said I don't want to leave any of them behind." "Did you recognize any of the heroes?" "Yes," Kurogiri said. "Who?" Izuku asked, worried what the answer was. "Kamui Woods and Death Arms." Izuku stared into the empty air for several seconds as the name sunk in. The video still stored in his phone rose into his mind from the dark corner it was held in his memories. "Drop me and the Nomu behind Death Arms." It was an order, more so than almost anything he had ever said to Kurogiri. "Understood." A warp gate opened under Izuku's feet much like at the USJ and he fell through. Right away his head passed that of Death Arms as he fell behind the man. Izuku's hand swung to touch the so-called hero's head before his feet even touched the ground. Even if the darkest corners of his mind would have disagreed, he didn't want to kill Death Arms, at least not there. He needed him alive. That didn't mean he was above risking injury to the failed hero. For a fraction of a second, he unleashed the vibration quirk, controlling its power to the best of his ability. There was no sound as he nimbly landed on his feet, followed by a loud crack when the Nomu landed next to him, cracking some asphalt. Finally, there was an audible thump as Death Arms collapsed on the ground. At that point they had been seen. Kamui would spun around, seemingly not bothered by the limited amount of killing intent Izuku let out. His wooden arm extended at high speed to grab either Izuku or Death Arms. Nomua. The large Nomua grabbed the extending arm and swung it hard enough to throw the wooden hero away. "Take him," Izuku said, pointing at Death Arms. The Nomua grabbed the man from back of his neck and lifted him upright with one hand. Izuku turned to face the other hero and countless police officers, some still battling with the other Nomas. "Nomas, stop. Come to me," Izuku commanded, and they did while he focused on the enemy and gestured towards the large Nomua. "If you are here, you should know a bit about what this Nomua can do. It has been called the anti-symbol of peace for a reason. Also, Death Arms is still alive in case you are concerned, for now. You are pure evil," Kamui Woods declared. "What do you want?" "Just my Nomas back." This time, Izuku wanted to say more, but usually his big mouth just got him into more trouble. One worthless hero for few Nomas seems like a fair trade, but don't think too long. The Nomu lifted Death Arms a bit higher. "Just let the ones you have restrained go, and we'll leave with no casualties. As heroes you should be prepared to sacrifice yourself, but how about all these police officers or the people inside the hospital who might get caught up in our battle?" It wasn't easy talking to Kamui so calmly, but at least Izuku's anger fueled his killing intent. Kamui's face was completely covered, but tension in the faces of the police officers around him was obvious even in the limited light of the streetlights. "You only want these creatures?" Kamui asked. "Yes, I prefer not to leave allies behind if I can help it. I am also not going to play along if you plan to delay waiting for reinforcements. You have 10 seconds. Izuku waited, 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 8. "Fine," Kamui said, probably gritting his teeth. "Let the beasts go," he ordered. The police officers released the two Nomas from restraints. They moved with extreme caution, but as the Nomus were released they simply ignored them and walked towards Izuku following his earlier command. A warp gate opened next to Izuku. The low-tier Nomus walked inside. Izuku stood straight, trying to project confidence. Finally, he gestured the large Nomu to move back towards the warp gate while doing the same. This time they walked backwards. Getting shot from behind once was enough for one evening. On his signal the Nomu dropped Death Arms next to him as it entered the warp gate. Few rash police officers stepped forward but were stopped by Kamui Woods extending branches. At least one of them was smart. "Let's go," Izuku started saying but froze mid-word. "No. I am here." All Might landed between Izuku and Kamui, cracking the asphalt even more than the Nomu had. Memory of his overwhelming power hit Izuku like his killing intent had been turned against him. He quickly crouched to touch Death Arms, but only met empty asphalt. The man was gone. Before Izuku could move to escape, he had already been hoisted up from one arm held in the near bone-crushing grip of the number 1 hero. Even if Izuku could have maintained killing intent with the shock he experienced, in that position he wasn't presenting any credible threat to people around him, let alone All Might. "And who might you be, villain?" All Might asked, arrogance in his voice befitting of a man who didn't see his opponent as a threat. Izuku didn't respond. He was too busy not hyperventilating at being at the mercy of the man he so hated. He wanted to kill the large man, but All Might was too powerful. He couldn't win. "Are you sure you aren't too young for this kind of stuff? You feel a bit young. Let's see." His other hand reached for Izuku's helmet. "No." Izuku shouted. His leg swung up faster than it had ever done, meeting All Might's chin, and stopped. He felt like he had kicked a concrete wall and only his reinforced boots stopped him from breaking his foot. "Impressive, but not enough," All Might said. "Let him go," a new voice shouted as a large shadow rose over them. Kurogiri had abandoned any pretense of human form and was just a dark cloud that emerged from nothing. "Kurogiri, Izuku shouted, "Leave, get out of here." "No. No." Izuku stopped, shocked by the Nomu's response. He was brought back into his senses by a yank as All Might jumped to the side. There were multiple yelps around him. Several warp gates had appeared on the ground that multiple police and still unconscious death arms had fallen into, but not through. The gates had closed around them, holding them trapped like All Might at the USJ. "Release him or they die," Kurogiri threatened, now surrounded by Nomus, all of the ones Izuku had just gotten out and several more that seemed to be at least above low tier. "You are a monster, I can't." All Might was cut off by a scream as one of the warp gates closed into one of the police officers, literally. In few agonizing seconds the upper half of the officer's stomach and up was left laying in an expanding red pool. If there was any life left in him, he couldn't scream anymore. A silence took over the street until a wet thud as the cut-off lower body fell from high above. Even you cannot save all of them while fighting all of the Nomus. Release young Shigaraki. Izuku was only now getting properly back into his senses with the help of the calming following All Might's arrival and Kurogiri's disobedience. His breath was calmer, and he moved with purpose as he turned in All Might's hold to face the man. He even considered his words before speaking. "Isn't it nice to have good trustworthy help? He just murdered a man and is threatening to murder a dozen more," All Might responded. "You seem in charge of him. You must tell him to stop. I thought you might be getting old, but I didn't think your hearing had gotten so bad. I already told him to leave." "He didn't." As he spoke, Izuku brought his second hand up to the one All Might was holding onto. "You are lucky my brother isn't here." "Brother, wait, that one called you Shigaraki." He grabbed All Might's hand and hit it with the vibration, as much vibration as he could. He wasn't sure if it caused any damage to the symbol of peace, but the shock traveled through his hand and into Izuku's wrist. The only thing preventing him from shouting in pain was his complete refusal to show any more weakness in front of All Might. All Might let go of his destroyed wrist and Izuku jumped back as soon as his feet touched the ground. His hand was hanging from his arm like there were no bones. Izuku held it up with his other hand to help the regeneration as it restored the damage he had caused. All Might's eyes widened. "You will be leaving now," Izuku interrupted, "unless you want more corpses here." Several people yelped as Kurogiri briefly tightened the warp gates around them. All Might gritted his teeth, but didn't move as Kurogiri's mist encased Izuku and all of the Nomus. "Don't worry All Might. We will meet again soon." As the mist cleared, Izuku let go the breath he hadn't realized he was holding and dropped on one knee. Kurogiri's mist hovered behind and around him, almost covering the large Nomu next to them from Izuku's sight. "Son," father said with concerned but stern voice, "what happened and why did all of my Nomus suddenly disappear?" Izuku started after a few seconds and lowered his head, "It didn't all go well. I got the Nomu out but took too long to get the others out. I told you the one Nomu was worth losing those low ends. That doesn't mean I was going to just abandon them, and I got them out but All Might was here." Izuku punched the floor hard enough to hurt. "I was too weak. I couldn't even follow his movements and didn't even realize before he was holding me up like a little kid. If you feel things should have been otherwise, you are expecting too much of yourself, at this point. He is considered the number one and the most powerful hero for a reason." Izuku could only squeeze his fist, not saying a word. "So, you decided to summon all the Nomus against All Might?" "No, Kurogiri." Izuku paused and glanced up at the mist cloud still surrounding him. "I asked him to get us out of there. I wasn't calm or in control, not ready to face him. Kurogiri must have used everything he had to follow my order." "I see. I believe we have talked about being considerate what you tell him. It is not important just because of your hesitation to command him." "I know. I think all the Nomu survived at least." "They did and have been returned to their place," Kurogiri confirmed. "That is not important, father declared, but then his tone softened, and he kneeled next to Izuku. Both of you are more valuable to me than all of the Nomu I gave you. That is why I said they could be sacrificed if necessary. I didn't think it was necessary. You trusted me with them. I wanted to bring them back, Izuku said, but then All Might arrived, and Kurogiri had to save me. I should reproach you for your carelessness, but I am impressed with your dedication again, so I don't need to change my plans. Izuku blinked in his helmet. Despite your training, there are still heroes who you aren't ready to face, especially All Might, not without help. Since you got my Nomu back, you can keep it. I trust you use it wisely, also for training. Izuku looked up at his father, then at the large Nomu. Huh. Unlike Tomura, you didn't leave important assets behind, and if you are going to take risks for that, you should at least have reliable backup. It may have failed at killing All Might, but should suffice for most foes you cannot defeat alone. You hear that, Nomu? Serve and protect my son. The Nomu let a short screech. Father stood back up. But do try not to steal the rest of my Nomus without asking, that goes for the both of you. Yes, master, Kurogiri said, obedient as always, usually. He shrank back to human form despite still appearing only as mist that his clothes emerged from. Yes, Dad. Father put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Get up, son. Even if you couldn't win, you can't let facing All Might shake you this much every time. That is the first thing you have to work on if you want to stand against him. I know, Izuku said as he stood up, but every time I even see him I understand, no training today. I must rest and prepare before Hisashi Midoriya can make his appearance for the cameras. Clean up and take some time to reflect on your actions today and what you could have done better. Come to get me when you are ready. Okay. Izuku glanced down where the bullet had entered his side. Father said nothing, not about that exactly. I hope you didn't leave behind anything that could be tracked back to you. Izuku realized what he meant, but too late. It is all taken care of, Kurogiri said. Good, Father said and turned away. Izuku didn't even move a finger until he had left the room. Then he finally took off his helmet to face Kurogiri. The Nomu stood still and silent. Back there, Izuku started, I told you to leave. Yes. You didn't. You told me no. Yes. I'm not complaining, but I thought you aren't supposed to be able to do that. Yes, my mission is to protect and serve you. But you didn't. Can you repeat that? My mission is to protect and serve you. In that order? Izuku asked. Yes. It might not have been what Father had intended with the Nomus, but Izuku didn't care. He took a step forward and embraced Kurogiri with a hug. That is fine for me, he said barely audibly before letting go of the Nomu. Sorry, I'll go change my clothes. I will clean the evidence for you, young Shigaraki. Izuku thought about asking about that, but decided it was unnecessary. If Kurogiri said he could make sure there was no issue, Izuku was going to believe it. Still, as he walked towards the dressing room, he glanced back and saw Kurogiri pouring some chemical from a large plastic container into a small warp gate. Izuku thought it better not to ask. Favorite, story author follow, story author. Fanfiction, unleash your imagination. Get GGE, okay, I really want to know what in the story gave you that idea. Proofread by 3D Phantom. Chapter 34, Who was he? Please come in, Nizu called as soon as Aizawa's still bandaged arm brushed against the door. Aizawa pushed the door open with his body, refusing to show any of the pain for simply pressing lightly against it. As soon as he saw the group gathered at the meeting room, he also started getting a headache. Nizu and All Might weren't unexpected or concerning on their own, but All Might was in his powered form, and with the detective Tsukachi present there was something more serious going on. Considering the recency of the USJ attack and regular visits by the detective at the school since then, that still wouldn't have been too bad. That is if they hadn't also been joined by the dog-headed chief of police and two other pro-heroes, Kamui Woods and Death Arms. Aizawa was going to need more coffee by the time this meeting was over. Please tell me you are here because of a breakthrough in the USJ investigation. Unfortunately it is quite the opposite, and what discoveries there are, raise some questions that will interest you as well. Is this related to last night's battle at the villain hospital? Yes. Nomua, the creature you fought at the USJ, was freed by an unknown attacker with several weaker Nomas, and the villain with a mist-like teleportation quirk helping him. Aizawa's still healing bones suddenly ached even more. And that isn't the worst part. You should sit. Recovery girl will have my tail if I hinder your recovery. Aizawa didn't fight the suggestion. Sitting down was a great relief, and despite how he presented himself to the students he wasn't about to go against the old lady. Nizu maintained control of the meeting as Aizawa sat. I am sorry to disrupt your respective works by asking all of you into this meeting, but there are reasons to believe we are facing a far greater threat than might be immediately obvious even from the two recent attacks. While the creature called Nomo captured at USJ has been liberated by the villain, the police and hospital staff had time to conduct experiments and especially DNA tests on it. During the USJ attack, the leader of the villains, called by the name of Shigaraki, referred to it as an artificial human. Based on the tests, this is not the case. Rather, it should be described as a former human. Nizu paused, giving everyone present time to process the information. Do you mean? Death Arms asked. Yes, whatever that creature was, it used to be a human, a small-time villain to be exact. Nizu placed a photograph of the man on the table. That is horrendous, Kamui Woods commented, and to think there are several more of those poor souls. That we know of, Nizu added, and that is not the most disturbing thing we have discovered. Already during the USJ incident we discovered that the creature had at least two quirks in addition to its immense strength, and neither of these matched the registered quirk of the original person. Additionally, the person who freed it appears to possess at least two quirks himself, perhaps more. Is that even possible? Death Arms asked. Yes, Aizawa responded and turned his head to look at Nizu. Is this why you wanted me to be involved in this meeting? Partially, you are also a part of this due to your own encounter with the creature. What are you talking about? Death Arms asked. Previously you asked if it is possible for people to have more than one quirk, ones they weren't born with. It is. We already know of one quirk that allows its wielder to take quirks from others and if they so choose to also give those quirks to other people. Hold on, Death Arms said. I've seen the news. Do you really have a student who can do exactly that? Yes, Aizawa finished. Are you saying one of your students? No, Nizu quickly responded. We think it is someone, even more dangerous. Over the generations since quirks first appeared, we are aware of only one other person capable of doing what we are talking about. We believed him to be dead, but with the discoveries of this Noma we must consider the possibility of that not being the case. So now you think All for One is alive, and involved with this league of villains. Aizawa held back a groan, his head hurt more just thinking about the possibility. That seems possible, Nizu confirmed. All for who? Death Arms asked. Aizawa sighed. All for One, it is the name of his quirk that he has adopted, Nizu said. He is the most powerful and dangerous villain we are aware of since the emergence of quirks. All Might, you tell them. Aizawa dozed off, sinking into his own thoughts as All Might explained who All for One was to the uninformed in their group. To think someone so despicable can exist, Death Arms said. Then again, with a quirk like that, him becoming a villain is obvious. I wish the government did more to control villain quirks. Aizawa's head perked up, as did his hair as a side effect of his quirk. What? What did you just say about quirks? I said villain quirks should be controlled better, or at least those people should be monitored better. Because you don't like the quirk they are born with? Before you answer, remember that we were talking about a quirk of one of my students. I haven't forgotten. You might want to re-evaluate your student selection principles. We do, but to the opposite direction to what you are suggesting. I find it difficult to believe I am hearing such prejudicial ideas from a supposed professional hero. Even the staff here might not be perfect, but we definitely need new screenings to eliminate people like you from the admission. You dare. Enough. Nizu might be small, but when the usually calm principal raised his voice, everyone shut up. Death Arms, as much as I'd like to destroy you in an academic debate on this topic, that is not what we are here for. That said, I will not allow attacks on our students, including verbal ones. And what do I care what you want? Have you even considered that kid might be involved? Hell, maybe he's the one who attacked us. That villain was small enough to still be a high schooler. You didn't even see him, Kamui Woods said, holding his temper much better. He knocked you out before you ever had the chance to. Death Arms gritted his teeth. That doesn't change the fact I'm right, as you and All Might both know. I can't deny that. They are about the same size as far as I could tell, All Might said, looking unusually meek as he glanced at Aizawa. Though Tsukachi has already investigated him, so I don't think he is directly involved. Like you thought All for One was dead? Death Arms asked. What do you want? Aizawa asked. We should question him. Test if he is involved. And how would you do that? Doesn't the detective here have a lie detector quirk? Also, that villain had some kind of healing quirk. Have you ever seen that kid injured? Yes, Aizawa said. Would you like to see the recording? I'd like to see it myself. It's school day right now, isn't it? Get him here and we'll see what we can find out. You will not harass my student just because you got beaten. People like you have already made his life difficult enough. It is hard enough to earn his trust as things are. This is a bit more important than your class. Chief, Death Arms turned to the chief of police, you have to agree. The dog-headed man seemed thoughtful for a moment and then sighed. Aizawa felt a headache coming up. Considering the threat this League of Villains poses, especially if they are tied to All for One, we have to investigate every possibility. I don't want to suspect Detective Tsukachi's abilities at their earlier meetings, but the boy hasn't been questioned about this matter directly. Do you actually have any evidence or way of identifying the villain other than having the detective ask about it from everyone you suspect? Aizawa asked. Tsukachi's and the police chief's expressions turned darker. Tsukachi was the first to talk. Unfortunately, they didn't leave much evidence behind. The villain was fully covered with a face covering, including a voice-changing helmet and gloves. We hope to get a blood sample from the floor where he was shot, but, well, what? Aizawa asked. Before we got to take a sample, the teleporting villain opened a small portal to that place and poured enough strong chemicals through it to cover the entire floor. We couldn't even try to get a sample before the fumes were ventilated out, and investigators don't expect to get anything usable. The only samples we have come from some of the Nomas. Their identity might give us some clues, but... So, you can only make accusations without even being able to prove anything. That is why he needs to be investigated, Death Arms declared. If he wasn't involved and has nothing to hide, he shouldn't have any issues with it. That is not true, Aizawa said, and that is an excuse tyrants use when they want to trample on people's rights. Death Arms gritted his teeth, but the chief of police raised his hand in front of the hero before he could say anything more. I understand your concern, but we are not talking about violating anyone's rights or accusing your students without evidence, at least I'm not. However, Questioning him is within our authority, and even if there are no indications of his involvement, his knowledge about this all-for-one quirk can be valuable. Why are you trying to convince me if you have already made the decision? There is another concern, Nizu interrupted. Midoriya doesn't know about all-for-one. Him learning of all-for-one and our investigation could lead to a negative reaction. I'd like to keep that part secret. He already knows, Aizawa interrupted. He's known about all-for-one since before coming to UA. Really? Death Arms said, and how is that? Everyone in the room stared at Aizawa, and the big headache had finally arrived. The painful silence continued for a long time. All Might seemed strangely tense, like he wanted to say something. Aizawa, Nizu said in a quiet voice that caused Aizawa goosebumps. I too would like to know the answer to that question, and how you know about what Midoriya knows. He told me. I find that difficult to believe considering the distrust he has shown. Aizawa sighed. You wanted me to guide him and earn his trust. To do so, I needed to show a little trust myself. Trust goes two ways, so I told him about your investigation and about all-for-one, or at least I tried to. Apparently, his old school had a history assignment about the man. I doubt that. I didn't even know about him, Death Arms said. That is your problem. I haven't confirmed the claim, but another student went to the same class. I haven't wanted to involve him in this. That might be the fastest way to get on Midoriya's bad side. I understand what you were seeking, Nizu said, but I am disappointed you gave away such information on your own. Without that we could at least control how to give it away. Actually, All Might said with timidness that didn't fit his massive frame. I might have had a similar discussion with him. At the risk of sounding like the principal, Aizawa said, I find that difficult to believe. The kid hates you. I know, and I doubt I made things any better, but there was something I had to talk about. He, All Might glanced at the visiting heroes, saw something I needed to address. I can confirm he already knows about all-for-one. Aizawa is also right that questioning him due to nothing but his quirk will not go over well, and I cannot be present. Why is that? Kamui Woods asked. All Might looked more nervous than most people would expect the number one hero to be capable of. I cannot afford to piss him off right now for reasons, and he might be more responsive to questioning if I'm not around anyway. Are you all afraid of this kid or something? Death Arms asked. We are afraid of failing him as teachers like every school before has done to him, Aizawa said. If the police want to talk to him, we can't stop you, but it will be on you, and if you don't do everything exactly by the book, the kid has enough lawyers to make the UA legal team lose sleep. I would have to agree with Mr. Aizawa, Nizu said. If the police request access to him in writing, we'll bring him to you. The rest is up to you. We will monitor the questioning, of course. My official position, though, is that I do not recommend it. For the rest of these matters, I will have a separate discussion with All Might and Aizawa later. Both of the hero teachers had shivers go through their spines, knowing that a lecture was sure to occur at a later time. Nizu had the chief write up a formal request. Unfortunately, getting Midoriya from class fell on Aizawa, which is how he found himself interrupting present mix lesson. Midoriya, come with me. The glare his request got in response was enough to tell him this was going to get ugly. That glare only softened a little bit as Midoriya passed Hitachi Shinso, who whispered something as he went by. Putting the trio in the same class was probably the smartest thing Nizu had done in a long time, and the principal was a certified genius. Midoriya stayed quiet barely long enough for the classroom door to close behind him and Aizawa. What do you want? Nothing, but there are other people who want to talk to you, and I'm not allowed to tell the police no on this matter. Why would police want to talk with me? 2 reasons, Aizawa responded. Your quirk might give you valuable insight on a matter concerning the USJ investigation, the NOMA more specifically. Aizawa paused for a moment, but Izuku wasn't having any of it. And the second reason. The Noma was broken out and taken by someone with multiple quirks, supposedly about the same size as you. The heroes who were. Aizawa stopped and turned to look at Midoriya, who had fallen behind. He was looking down so Aizawa couldn't see his expression, but slowly the kid's hands stopped shaking and squeezed into fists. So, he said, any time police run into someone with strange quirks they are going to come for me. Aizawa sighed. No, I hope. However, they now have 2 cases of villains with multiple quirks. Nizu and All Might. On the second day of school, after your fight with Bakugo, we talked about All for One. I told you he is dead. Midoriya tensed visibly. We aren't so confident about that anymore. Considering him and you are the only examples we know of quirks being transferred between people. I know you are capable of being smart and logical. If you were a police officer or a hero involved with this, wouldn't you want to talk to yourself in this situation? Midoriya didn't say anything, but as Aizawa was waiting for a response, he got it from the kid's body language. His fist loosened and most of the tension in his stance disappeared faster than Aizawa thought possible. The only sign of the rapid change to a less perceptive person was a slow long exhale as Midoriya brought himself under control. Aizawa had to give the kid credit for achieving that despite the obvious emotional baggage he carried. Though as Midoriya raised his head, the look in his eyes was worryingly empty, to the point of being downright cold. Get it over with, was all he said. Aizawa nodded and they walked the rest of the way to the meeting room the others were waiting in. He opened the door and stepped aside, preferring to let someone else become the target of Midoriya's ire. It happened faster than he thought. Midoriya was barely 2 steps in when he froze still and a blade of blue hot fire flashed into existence next to his hand, shaking like he was struggling to not use it. Aizawa couldn't hold the kid back in his injured state but quietly prepared to use his quirk. The others in the room weren't quite as calm. At least 2 chairs clacked against the floor. Midoriya raised his arm to point at someone with the blade. What are they doing here? Recovery girl had better prescribe Aizawa more painkillers after this. Midoriya. Nizu commanded more forcefully than Aizawa had heard the principal talk in a long time, but Midoriya didn't budge. Nizu quickly calmed down though. What might be the issue with our guests? Existing, Midoriya responded through gritted teeth. Daring to call themselves heroes. Being here. Midoriya's dragon blade flashed seemingly even hotter. A branch from Kamui wood stretched across the table at a blinding speed to tie up Midoriya. Midoriya stepped aside and cut the extending branch 3 times in less than that many seconds. You have a strange idea of talking, Eraserhead. Aizawa muttered things under his breath that would normally endanger a teacher's career if spoken at a school and stepped into the room. The first thing he did was to use his quirk, not on Midoriya though, but the pro heroes across the room. The extended tree branch didn't disappear but stopped moving. Eraserhead, what the hell? Death Arms shouted. I could ask you too the same, Aizawa said. Sit down. Don't bother, Midoriya said and turned towards the door, but Aizawa placed himself in the way. Midoriya engaged him in a staring contest and held his own, despite that being Aizawa's specialty. Sit, Aizawa said. What are they doing here? Midoriya seated. They were the heroes at the scene when the Noma was taken. They might have been there, but they are not heroes. How dare you, you brat? Death Arms interrupted. The look in Midoriya's eyes told Aizawa the hero was simply throwing more dynamite into the fire. Midoriya finally broke his stare to redirect it at Death Arms. Heroes risk themselves to save others. Fake heroes let others die to keep themselves safe. You didn't want to take the risk of fighting an enemy you couldn't beat in a single punch, so you just watched him murder someone. Aizawa looked at Midoriya, ready to erase his quirks if needed. And what do you know about being a pro hero? Death Arms asked. More than you, apparently. You. Death Arms stepped around the table and towards Midoriya but was stopped by Kamui Wood's branch grabbing him. "We are not making any progress like this," the wooden hero said. "I agree," the chief of police nodded. "Perhaps you two should step out for the moment. We can handle the questioning." Death Arms gritted his teeth but didn't fight the chief. "Fine, but don't let that villain kid play you. Get out," Aizawa commanded. He sighed in relief as the door shut behind the two heroes. Afterwards he found Midoriya looking at him. "Any other issues, problem child?" Midoriya stared at him quietly for a long moment. "No, not yet." "Then sit down so we can get this done." "Okay, you two. This can't be good for your recovery." "Then try not to strain my mental health." "Depends on them." "I'll try." After those words Midoriya, finally, sat down. To be safe, Aizawa sat next to him. Tsukachi took a seat opposite to the kid with Nizu and the chief of police. Someone at least had to stay on the kid's side when everyone else was literally facing against him. The chief of police spoke first. "I apologize for the behavior of our hero companions, even if it wasn't unilateral or completely unprovoked, woof." "Oh, it was plenty provoked, by them. Could you explain in more detail? Clearly something is happening between you three that I am not well informed on." Midoriya was quiet for a few seconds, looking at the table until he seemed to get his emotions back in check, surprisingly quickly considering the storm of emotions they had just seen a glimpse of. "Why don't you ask your detective, or the principal? From what I've heard they've been poking their noses in my private life. This meeting isn't the first time I've been harassed for my quirk, including by people in this room. That is quite concerning to hear, detective." The detective hesitated and glanced at both Midoriya and Nizu before his shoulders slumped and he faced the chief. "We have conducted an investigation on him for." "It was my decision," Nizu said. "We have already discussed the matter of All for One. After learning of Midoriya's quirk I had to investigate the matter and his background." Midoriya huffed but kept whatever he was going to say to himself. "And our hero companions?" the chief asked. "They were the hero responders at the incident where Midoriya's knee." Aizawa wished his arms weren't still broken and wrapped up as he couldn't properly comfort his student who was literally shaking next to him. He could only watch as Midoriya had to calm himself down. Nizu gave him a moment before continuing. "The performance of Death Arms and Kamui Woods in that battle was, less than impressive in the moments leading up to the end result." "I see. I'm sorry to hear that. You have endured much for such a young age, and yet we are here to put you through more. So either don't or get on with it. I'm missing class. We'll try to be brief. There are two reasons we asked you here. Considering the concern that has been raised concerning the villain All for One, whom you appear to already be aware of, we are hoping to find out if you can provide insight on the quirk by the same name." "And the other?" Midoriya asked. "The Nomo creature from the USJ incident was freed by a villain. Based on eyewitness statements the person had multiple quirks and was about your size." Midoriya said nothing. The chief cleared his throat. "As our leads on the matter are limited, we must look into every possible lead, especially if we are to discuss with you more on the matter. Therefore, we request that you submit to 2 tests." "What kind of tests?" Midoriya asked. "First, we want to question you with Detective Tsukachi and his quirk. I believe you are already familiar with it." Midoriya nodded. "We would also, with your permission, like to cut a small wound on your hand." "Do what?" "Well, according to All Might's observation," the chief said, making Aizawa tense as he mentioned the number 1. Midoriya stayed quiet. "The attacker appears to possess some sort of a rapid-acting healing quirk. Demonstrating a lack of one would be the easiest way to counter the suspicion raised by Death Arms and All Might. If he really wanted to convince Midoriya he should have been more careful with the forbidden names. Pretty sure you can't make me. He met the chief in a staring contest for a Midoriya. The kid looked up at him. Shinso has expressed interest in my capture weapon. If you cooperate, I'll give him private lessons to see if he could learn to use it. Midoriya stared at him for a few seconds. He has mentioned liking that, just not confident at being able to use it even if I got him one. It could save him if he couldn't brainwash an enemy, Midoriya said and paused. Then he raised both his hands, lighting his dragon blade quirk in one of them, though much smaller than usual, like a burning dagger. Others by the table had barely enough time to yelp as he cut and burned a long gash across his other hand without even flinching, and all for private lessons to someone else Aizawa had considered giving anyway. Midoriya held his hand up for the trio in front of him to see. Satisfied? Yes, the chief said after watching the very much not healing wound for a few seconds. Tsukachi got up for a moment and retrieved a roll bandage from his jacket which Midoriya accepted despite his still very much unfriendly expression. Tsukachi returned to his seat and waited quietly, long enough for Midoriya to wrap his hand. He held his own hand between them as his quirk required physical contact. Midoriya was about to reach out with his healthy hand but seemed to change his mind at the last moment and reached out with his barely wrapped injured hand. The detective's own hand was stained by some blood as they met. Midoriya sighed, losing some of his tension. Midoriya, Tsukachi said, are you involved with the villain known as All for One? No. Detective Tsukachi waited, looking thoughtful for a long time before letting go and leaning back. Something feels strange, probably because of how he is feeling about all this, but I couldn't.
I think it was only going as not going to each other's eye because Izuku has two person that has Izuku is not legitly. He's kind of thinking of Izuku and Shimura as two different people. So Izuku is Hasashi Midoriya is associated with Izuku Midoriya, not with Shimura. And Shimura is associated with All for One, which he doesn't consider much of the fun. But his Hasashi Midoriya, All for One, is not acting as Hasashi Midoriya. So that's why it's like making it like it's mostly two different personalities, except he has one. Izuku Midoriya has two people. It's basically two people. Izuku Midoriya and Shigaraki. Okay, I'm gonna say Shigaraki because that's the only name I'm going to go with. Izuku and All for One has, we can say it's two people more or less because he has multiple identities. So All for One and Hasashi Midoriya is linked to Izuku Midoriya. Nothing more. They can't go. And the other person now, and the other one, Shigaraki and All for One are connected. They don't have connections to the other party. That's why it's not showing up as a lie. Also, with how many most of the news are, it's feeling right now, and that's also why it's feeling strange because of that. Also because of the feelings. So I want to give this quick explanation about what the fuck is happening here. Okay, let's continue.
Detect a lie. So, you are going to stop with these accusations? Aizawa asked. Unless something else comes up, the chief responded, I can't say the same for Death Arms though. I don't see any reason to care about what he thinks, Midoriya said. Now what do you want to know? First, anything you know about having or giving someone more than one quirk. Right, first thing is to be careful about it. Getting more quirks can be harsh. For me it has gotten better after a time, but that could be because of my quirk. I've never even tried to give anyone more than one extra quirk. All Might also warned about that based on what he knew about All for One. But you have given someone an extra quirk. T. Hitachi. His classmate, Aizawa added. He has his father's quirk now, which I did at his father's request, and we've both had Tinya's. He's another classmate and friend, we've had his quirk to deal with Eraserhead's rational deception. What do you mean by that? The chief asked. It is not important, Aizawa said, a test for the students. I see. So given the ability to transfer quirks, someone having two of them isn't really an issue then. No need to turn them into nomas. Seems so, Midoriya said. I think it might depend on the quirk. Hitachi had no issue getting his father's quirk, but their quirks were already similar and related. He could probably handle his mother's quirk too, but I haven't wanted to risk testing it. Even I myself haven't had the chance to hold more quirks than.
See. Let's see, we see Shiraki has only shown regeneration and vibration. To the quirk, so he's not showing a third quirk at all, not a third quirk at all, which he's saying there is a possibility of having a third quirk. One Hitoshi Mizuno. Second, his father. Third, it's possible, he's saying, because his father, because his mother could happen. Let's continue.
That. The chief wrote some notes before continuing. Other than this, Hitachi, have you used your quirk to give anyone else quirks other than their own? Not permanently. Hitachi is the only one right now with two, and just so you know, neither of those is a healing quirk, even if I'd love to get him one of those considering this school's inability to protect its students. The coldness in Midoriya's voice as he said the last part came as a not at all unclear warning to everyone in the room. We have no reason to suspect your classmates. That won't change the problem that our enemy has fighters with multiple quirks in addition to multiple of these Noma creatures. That I can't help you with, unless you want to confiscate their quirks. That is, an interesting idea, but I'm afraid the law doesn't even know such a concept. Well, that is your problem. Is there something else you wanted from me, any other part of your job you need a high school student to help with? The dog-faced chief's expressions were difficult to read, but there was definite tension there in response to Midoriya's last comment. Working with the police is an important part of the work of a hero. Rather than a disruption, you should see this as a learning experience in addition to providing your knowledge to help catch these villains who tried to kill you. Midoriya didn't say anything to that. The chief waited for a moment before nodding. We still need to discuss matters here, but I think you two can go. Midoriya got up without a word while Aizawa at least gave a nod to the chief and then followed Midoriya out. The kid tensed right at the door, looking at the two heroes waiting in the corridor, but Aizawa kept moving and pushed Midoriya with his body to keep moving before the kid could start another incident. Midoriya's eyes never left the death stare he was giving to Death Arms. He held up his cut and burned hand, even pulling the bandage off. That actually startled the pro hero. Aizawa remained quiet until the two pro heroes had gone back into the room. Midoriya, go see Recovery Girl about that wound before getting lunch. Don't worry about being late from class if you need to. Are you sure you don't need to see Recovery Girl? It is your fault. You better not forget your promise. I won't, Aizawa sighed. Shinso can start training today after school if he wants to. The rest depends on him. Midoriya nodded and walked away from Aizawa. Rather than staying on the main hallway all the way to the stairs, Izuku soon turned to a smaller corridor. There was a secondary stairwell that way, but something felt strange about his choice in direction, so rather than going on with his business, Aizawa approached the corridor, applying all his experience to move without a sound. As he glanced into the side corridor, he saw Midoriya leaning against the wall with one hand, breathing heavily enough for the motion to be visible from the back. Either his emotions were an even greater challenge, or he wasn't controlling them as well as he seemed to. Aizawa didn't have the time to decide what to do with this information as a new set of steps drew his attention. Teacher, Tenya Ida greeted as he stopped a few meters away. Unsurprisingly, he was accompanied by Shinso. More surprisingly, they were followed by Kirishima and Tokoyami, though the latter seemed to have been dragged there by his sentient quirk that stretched out to the duo up front. You came looking for Midoriya, Aizawa stated. There was no question or uncertainty in his voice. Perhaps that is for the best. Saves me the headache. He is right there. Make sure he doesn't skip his visit to Recovery Girl. Aizawa nodded towards where Midoriya was struggling to hold himself together and walked past his friends. He stopped next to Shinso. Shinso, you're special. What classes was he talking about? Ida asked. I have no idea. Shouldn't you ask him? Kirishima said. No. I'll just ask Izuku. There was a short pause. Again. Ida asked. So, this wasn't the first time. Again, Shinso answered. What did they put him through this time? You two stay back. Aizawa stopped to lean against the wall as soon as they disappeared behind the corner. If something like this had happened before, it could happen again, and as their teacher, it was another headache he needed to be ready for. What happened to him? Who should I tear apart? They tagged along with us, Shinso said. More than 2 people can be worried for you at a time. You don't have to talk in front of Eve, don't worry. I cut it to show I don't have a That wasn't everything, was it? Ida asked. No. Death Arms and Kamui Woods were there. The pro heroes. Kirishima asked. Why would that make you? He fell quiet like someone had flipped a switch. It lasted for a while before he spoke again. Maybe we should go, leave you 3 alone. There was another pause until Midoriya spoke. No, since you are already here it's fine. Just don't ask too many questions, Shinso said, and remember that those 2 heroes being there was not easy for Izuku. Okay, if you say so. And don't talk about what you saw here. Our lips are sealed, Dark Shadow said. You don't have lips. Neither does Tokoyami, Midoriya said, sounding tired despite the joking comment. Still, thank you. I understand the situation was difficult for you, Ida said, but we should really go to the nurse's office. That wound must be painful. Worth it, Midoriya said. Oh right, Toshi, remember how you said you were interested in Eraserhead's capture weapon? So that's what he meant. I know I'm going to hate the answer, but what has my extra training got to do with you cutting yourself? I just need to know for the talk we are going to have with Mr. Aizawa. Aizawa left the wall and walked away faster than before. Favorite, story author follow, story author.
Can you remind me, please, like?